Chapter 1107. Time went back to 5 days ago. Needless to say, the Temple of Light headquarters had indeed done their best to defend themselves. Other things aside, just the unique terrain of this isolated island surrounded by water on all sides was a natural barrier. It was easy to defend and difficult to attack. Coupled with the constant patrols on the island, as well as the endless magic detection methods, the heavenly network was nothing more than this. After that, Tang En thought of sneaking in through the underground waterway and entering the heart of the island first, avoiding the martial law measures of the nets above snares below to the greatest extent. But not long after, the independent underground waterway design in the central area of the Temple of Light headquarters told Tang En a bloody truth. There was a reason why the Temple of Light could stand tall on the mainland for thousands of years. If he walked in the air, he would be a live target. If he walked on the ground, he would not be able to avoid the sea of people and magic detection. If he walked underground, he would directly hit a dead end. Even his previously successful teleportation method could not get close to the island for a moment. Tang En felt like a hunting dog circling around a hedgehog. The delicious food was right in front of him, but he could not eat it at all. Fortunately, there was always a way out. It was also fate that made Tang En think of the coronation of the Crown Prince. On the surface, this matter had nothing to do with Tang En, and it had nothing to do with the assassination of the Pope. If the Crown Prince wanted to ascend the throne, he had to come to the Temple of Light headquarters for the coronation. And the Pope, who was in charge of conferring the crown, of course, had to come out of the Hedgehog Cave to welcome the Crown Prince. Through the system's powerful ability to categorize information, Tang En looked up the past coronation ceremonies of the brand's new king and found that all the coronation locations were fixed in the main hall of the Temple of Light headquarters. What did the above information mean? It meant that even if Tang En could not sneak into the central area of the Temple of Light headquarters, even if he could not reach the Pope's bathroom, kitchen, bedroom and other private places, he still had the opportunity to attack the latter. All he needed to do was to wait near the main hall. Thus, Tang En recalled the scene of the shrine that he had seen when he passed by the Holy Land Water Lotus. That place seemed to be right beside the stone path outside the main entrance of the main hall. Subsequently, 5 days, a whole 5 days, Tang En, who had silently snuck into the ornamental pond, had a hollow grass stem in his mouth and a holy water lotus on top of his head. He stepped on the water in the void and clung to a lotus stem in the form of a vine. It did not eat or sleep. It was neither happy nor sad. It did not move at all. It was as if it was a rock that had always existed and would always exist. Every morning, along with the leisurely morning bell in the temple, he opened his eyes. Not long after, the faint sound of prayer could be heard through the water. It was peaceful and peaceful. As far as his eyes could see, other than the fish and prawns swimming around, the scene in front of him was vivid and consistent. On the stone path, the most common thing he saw were armored guards coming and going. They patrolled in a regular and strict manner with a solemn expression. The more serious and even humble ones were the temple handymen. They hurriedly passed by with various sundries in their arms, and bowed from time to time. There were also some nuns who walked by in small step. Their wide white robes could not hide their young and beautiful bodies. Sometimes there were also a few old men in red robe. Their expressions were either dark and cold or kind. They walked in the middle of the stone path without looking sideways in front of others. The passers-by on the way would all step aside and bow to them. Behind the crowd, his expression relaxed unconsciously. He turned his head sideways and occasionally glanced around. He viciously peeped at the white-robed nun's slim back and perky buttocks. He thought that the nun's status was not low. She should be a high-level figure in the temple. It was a pity that she did not match the target in his heart from the stone path, which was neither long nor short, which was the whole world of Tang En today. He could see the social class here. It was clearly divided and strictly adhered to the rules. It was almost impossible to cross the line. It was like a huge machine that was running well. Each part was doing its own thing. Each part was active within the scope of their own social class. They did not dare to set foot in any other field. Only at night, under the cover of the night, some things that were not within the scope of the rules would happen. Handsome temple knights and beautiful white-robed nuns, young handymen and women of the temple, and so on, would occasionally counterattack and pair up. They would accompany each other to a secluded place by the pond for a tryst. They would not disturb each other and quietly enjoy the beautiful scenery of the pond under the moonlight. They usually did not stay for long. When they got along, they were very simple. At most, they would touch each other's hands or hug each other. Kissing was rarely seen. It was worth mentioning that the intensity of the patrolling guards did not relax at all at this time. Wave after wave of magic detection ripples in the void had never stopped. However, it seemed that it was a convention. They completely turned a blind eye to the wild lovebirds who were having trysts by the pond. It more or less reflected the human feelings of the temple look. It was associated with the corporate culture of the temple. It could be seen how bored Tang En, who was floating underwater, was now. The sun rose from the east and set in the west. The cycle repeated. The morning bell was still melodious and wanton. The collective prayer was still quiet and peaceful. The world on the stone path in front of him also, well, it became monotonous and boring, emptiness, loneliness, as well as the possibility that he would never be able to see the hope of success, and so on and so forth. All these negative emotions converged into an icy cold tide that covered the sky and covered the earth, scouring every corner of Tang En's body and mind at every moment. In the end, they all turned into that clear pool of water, slowly rippling away with the wind. Perhaps this was completely different from the impression that people got from literature, dramas, and other forms of expression, but this was the daily work of a killer. Stripped of the external decorations, whether it was hot-blooded or romantic or cold and sad, what was left was only boredom, patience, perseverance, and less than 3 seconds of coolness. This was the dilemma that a serious killer often encountered and the unique qualities that they had. This was the truth. Although Tang En had never really gone deep into the circle of assassins in the other world, he had occasionally heard about the various performances and legends of his peers in the other world. For example, in order to get close to the target of assassination, being a coachman or a servant for a few months, these were just child's play. In order to assassinate a noble who hid in the manor and did not come out, a female assassin slept first in the gatehouse, then in the housekeeper, and finally climbed into the noble's big bed and succeeded. In addition, there were even more perverted ones. In order to wait for the arrival of the target of assassination, they squatted in the smelly latrine pit for a few weeks, and finally succeeded when the target was in the toilet. Compared to these, it had to be said that Tang En's assassin career had always been non-mainstream. It could not be helped. It was not that he did not want to mingle in the mainstream circle, but there were too many obstacles in the way of subjective and objective bystanders. The experience of being hunted almost ran through his journey in the other world. Later, he even went to the battlefield. How could he be a quiet and serious killer? Fortunately, Tang En was both lucky and unlucky at the same time. After walking around for a long time, Tang En finally returned to the starting point and returned to his old profession, which was to puff underwater for 5 days. Perhaps it was this rare seriousness that made the goddess of fate, who existed in the unseen world, take a special look at him. Therefore, Tang En's luck value was off the charts. On the day of the coronation, an old guy who looked like the target appeared in his line of sight. Tang En had never seen the Pope before, this was for sure. In fact, other than the people in the temple, even the ordinary nobles might not have seen the Pope, who had always lived in seclusion, with their own eyes. Fortunately, there were portraits of the Pope in the market, and fortunately, Philip was not an ordinary noble. Moreover, there was the traitor Owens here. Therefore, after comparing the physique appearance, clothing characteristics, and so on of the kind-looking old man in front of him with the impression in his heart, Tang En was close to 80% sure that it was him. Therefore, the water rippled, and the body clinging to the stem of the lotus trembled slightly. At the same time that the stiff consciousness of the limbs was removed, the ferocious beast was awakening. In the blink of an eye, he saw the guy wearing a domineering robe and the big shots who were clustered around him. They were obviously of high status, but their expressions and postures were humble. The corners of Tang En's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a few bubbles. He was 100% sure. His gaze was as calm as ever, and his killing intent was set. Immediately, he saw the target take a few steps this way as if he was seeking death. When he came to the railing and faced the bunch of lotus flowers above his head, Tang En smiled. His smile was unusually gentle, without a trace of killing intent. The next moment, he kicked his legs and leaped. With a splash, he instantly tore the priceless water lotus and broke out of the water with a loud bang. The water lotus was less than 30 feet away from the railing. This distance was practically nothing to Tang En, and it was within his killing range. Therefore, without even needing to blink subconsciously, Tang En leaped into the air in front of the Pope. He met the turbid pupils of the Pope, raised his hand, brandished his dagger, and drew a fatal arc. Be careful. There's an assassin. It was almost certain that the big shots who were in high positions and lived like princes were rarely strong fighters who had survived hundreds of battles. However, a lack of combat experience did not mean that they were not strong enough. At least, the dozen or so red-robed archbishops of the temple were not like that. On the contrary, each of them had the powerful strength of a magus. Before Tang En's dagger arrived, they, who had suddenly become alert, cried out in alarm and shouted a warning. However, it was just a warning. If they really wanted to do something, such as take effective measures to save the Pope and so on, that was really overestimating and making things difficult for them. The real rescuer was the venomous snake spear that came from the side of the Pope's back when the lotus flower was torn into pieces in an instant. It was a silent, soundless serpent spear. It was an old man with white hair and sharp eyes like an eagle. He had been following behind the Pope like a shadow, but his presence was very low. Previously at the pier and along the way, he did not greet the eldest prince and the others, so the latter basically did not notice him. However, his identity was indeed a high-ranking member of the temple. He was a retired holy head knight. His existence showed that although the temple seemed to not care about Tang En's assassination, they were not careless at all when it came to actual action. They took it seriously enough. Unfortunately, even with such thorough precautions, when Tang En really went all out to assassinate, this retired head knight's rescue speed was still half a breath late. There were two reasons for this situation. First, objectively, Tang En's speed was too shocking, and did not give anyone a chance to react at all. Second, subjectively, when the Pope took a few steps towards the railing, this retired head knight did not immediately follow up like before. Of course, this was not his fault. After all, no matter how good he was at following the Pope like a shadow, there was no way he could follow the Pope step by step. Because of this, his position was a little awkward. He could not immediately block in front of the Pope, and the angle of his rescue was also very awkward, but no matter what the reason was, this retired head knight still made a mistake. So after a moment of consideration, he decisively made a decision. He gave up on rescuing the Pope and directly stabbed Tang En's left chest with his spear. Besieging Wei to save Zhao. Tang En, who was in the air, saw this and could not help but secretly praise. This was indeed the best way to deal with this situation. If Tang En insisted on completing the assassination, the result was very likely that he would die together with the Pope. But if Tang En hesitated, or chose to use his dagger to block the spear first, then he would lose the best opportunity to assassinate the Pope. The result could be imagined. One had to admit that a holy head knight was still a holy head knight. as the sharpest existence of the temple's external force. Even if he had already retired, he could still bloom with a dazzling brilliance that was different from the other high-ranking members of the temple. But unfortunately, the one he met this time was Tang En. The corner of his mouth was slightly raised, and his gaze was firmly fixed on the Pope, who was subconsciously stepping back while slightly raising the crystal scepter in his right hand. It was as if he did not see the cold light spear in front of him that was about to pierce through his heart. He muttered in his heart, "Feast of slaughter." In the next moment, a long hiss was heard. No, puff. Blood splattered everywhere. The cold light spear was like a venomous snake that bit viciously on the left side of Tang En's chest. In an instant, it pierced through and pierced a transparent bloody hole. At the same time, Tang En's right hand, which was holding the dagger steadily, did not tremble at all. Under the horrified gaze of the surrounding people, he instantly swept past the Pope's shriveled neck that was like a dehydrated orange peel. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Listen, there was the sound of the wind. Thin lines of blood instantly spread and tore. The time needle seemed to have completely stopped at this moment. Immediately, with a click, the crystal scepter fell into the dust. After rolling for half a circle, it completely stopped moving. The huge holy crystal at the top of the scepter was still trying its best to emit a faint light, and it looked very unwilling to give up. Originally, it could release an earth-shattering power and create a commotion that could overturn rivers and seas. It only needed a few more breaths, no, one breath's time. But now, it could only lie there powerlessly and quietly. It's over. At this moment, Tang En's eyes, which were as calm as an ancient well in the deep mountains, flickered slightly. Just as the clergy who often talked about the Church of Light said, all living things were equal. Under the Grim Reaper's scythe, all things were equal. Even if he was the spokesperson of God walking in the world, even if he was the Pope, P.S. Many readers are guessing how Civet will kill the big boss, the Pope. Haha, that's right, he will stab him to death with a single stab. Surprised? Feeling cheated? No, 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 you don't understand Civet's breadth of mind. As the saying goes, a big voice is silent, and an elephant is invisible. Ahem, well, I can't make it up anymore. Haha, just kidding. In fact, this was decided a long time ago. Civet had never spent any time on the role of the Pope before. This was just a side character, and a side character should have the awareness of being a side character, right? Even if his status was high enough, well, a side character is a side character. Are you satisfied with this explanation? If not, come and beat me up, carrot. Want to know more about the exciting developments of the strongest killer system? Open WeChat now, click the plus sign at the top right, choose to add a public account to your friends, search for Kitty Ann's Hongwenwang, and follow the public account. You will never miss a new update. Chapter 1108. Year 557 of the brand new calendar, the end of winter and the beginning of spring, the day of the new king's ascension. This day was destined to be recorded in history, dyed with thick black ink, and constantly debated by future generations. As for the reason, it was very simple. Throughout the 1,000 years of history of the Empire's temple, was there any supreme being like the Pope who was assassinated by an assassin? Presumably, there was none. Therefore, Tang En's slash was not only as simple as killing a person, but more importantly, he had created an unprecedented and terrifying record. But it was very obvious. As the person involved, Tang En did not have this awareness. After he slit the throat, he looked at the Pope's blank expression in front of him, as well as the turbid pupils that contracted rapidly and then expanded instantly. Without hesitation, he quickly stepped sideways. With a poof, the cold spear in his left chest was removed, and the dark dagger in his right hand was swung in reverse. Once again, it drew a cruel arc. The target was repeated and precise, cutting towards the neck of the Pope, who was subconsciously stumbling back. A qualified assassin would never, and should not, expect to have more than one assassination opportunity. It must be done in one go. Tang En was very clear about the power of his throat slit. There was no doubt that it was absolutely fatal. But he was still not at ease. There were too many mysterious things in the temple. Although it was unlikely, no one dared to guarantee that the temple would not have miraculous magic like the resurrection spell. Moreover, with the powerful people like Wu Ding and Bamatu, they had previously warned Tang En not to underestimate the Pope and not to be careless. So, Tang En decided to go all out. "Stop!" shouted in horror. The retired head commander finally could no longer maintain his calm appearance. Although he did not understand why the spear had pierced the Pope's vital point just now, the other party was still alive and kicking, as if he was not affected in the slightest. But this was not the main point now. The main point was the arc of strength of the slash swoosh. The cruel light of the blade swept past, bringing with it an even more cruel cutting sound. A big round head, like a fountain of free money, a large curtain of blood instantly rose to the sky. That's right, decapitation. The professional name was head and body separation surgery. If cutting the throat was not enough insurance, then decapitation should be enough. Not to mention that Tang En's decapitation just now had a bit of tyrannical blood in it. Bang! Swish! Swish! The head that flew out suddenly exploded in midair, and the stinking blood that carried some white and viscous liquid sprayed out wantonly and instantly drenched the faces and bodies of everyone in the surroundings. This time, he should be deader than dead. Even if God appeared, there was nothing he could do. God! Don't, Your Holiness. It was complicated to describe, but in fact it was only the blink of an eye from Twain's violent attack to the Pope's head being separated from his body. The head commander, head's head was God, and of the head Pope, head, God of the head head, screamed God, head, and head. Head, God of the God, quick! There's an assassin. Just like the previous pointless warning, although the surrounding people were shouting and wailing, in fact, no one actually stepped forward to make a move. On the contrary, looking at Tang En, who was holding a bloody dagger and not hiding his murderous aura, the head Pope could not help but step back in fear. This was the so-called, a dog that barks does not bite, and a dog that bites never barks. The long spear was like lightning. Only the retired head commander's eyes turned red in an instant. He roared angrily and threw himself forward without a care. Tang En's situation suddenly became dangerous. To be honest, the assassination itself was not the most difficult part. The difficult part was how to escape safely. However, Tang En was already prepared for this before he attacked. He just leaned to the side and dodged the spear. Then, he casually reached out his hand. Your Highness, be careful. Retreat quickly, protect His Highness, ha! It's too late. Amidst the screams and warnings, the bloody dagger was already pressed against the pale crown prince's neck. Tang En laughed and turned around, leaning against the railing. He did not forget to take the opportunity to stomp on the crystal scepter on the ground and completely remove the restriction on Sylvia's body. Then, he scanned the chaotic scene and shouted coldly, "Shut up! If he dares to take a step forward, he will die." As soon as he shouted, the surroundings fell silent. With the bloody massacre just now, no one would believe that Tang En's threat was just empty talk. In other words, if he could even kill the Pope, then a mere crown prince who had yet to become the new king would naturally not be a problem. For fear of breaking the vases, the situation on the stone path fell into a temporary stalemate. The retired head commander, whose eyes were about to pop out of their sockets, was hesitantly called out by a few archbishops in red. At this moment, Tang En finally had time to let out his first breath. He did not care about the guard knights who were quickly surrounding him, nor did he care about the shrill sirens that suddenly sounded in the distance because of the detection of Tang En's presence. He lowered his head and glanced at the bleeding hole on his left chest. He took a deep breath and quickly panted a few times. The muscles around the wound suddenly trembled violently and strangely contracted. He relied on his abnormal body control to slightly slow down the bleeding. Yes, that's right. The previous shot did not hit Tang En's heart, which was the vital point. The reason was, of course, the effect of the killing feast skill that defied the natural order. Tang En used his rule domain at the crucial moment and paused the space for a moment. This allowed the retired head commander's shot, which he was almost certain to hit, to finally graze his heart and pierce through his body. With Tang En's abnormal body constitution that was comparable to the alien, as long as it did not hit his vital points directly, he did not have to worry about losing his ability to fight in a short period of time. Of course, the current situation was not something that could be resolved by fighting strength. After Tang En successfully killed the Pope, he had also completely forced himself into a desperate situation. Now, it was likely that all the clergymen on the island had already known that Tang En was here. It was believed that it would not be long before Tang En faced a formation that was 100 times more terrifying than the current one, until he was completely strangled. As for the eldest prince who was being held hostage, unfortunately, this was the temple headquarters and not the capital's palace. Therefore, he was not some kind of golden shield that could avoid death. At most, he could only protect Tang En for a while. It had to be said that Tang En played too big this time. He even killed the Pope. Of course, the temple headquarters would not let him leave safely. Otherwise, their 1,000-year reputation would be completely destroyed. Tang En was very clear about this, so without the slightest hesitation, he decisively planned to call for reinforcements. He reached into his pocket and paused. When he took out his hand, there was a lively little fish in his palm. Well, this was just an accident. Of course, the little fish could not be some kind of powerful reinforcements. The corner of Tang En's eyes twitched. He was speechless as he threw the little fish that was about to settle down in his arms into the pond behind him. Then he reached into his pocket again. This time, he took out a small package. He untied the outer waterproof tarpaulin with one hand and looked up. Facing the vigilant gazes around him, Tang En raised the corner of his mouth slightly. He raised his hand and threw the contents into the air. Whoosh! Bang! A bunch of gorgeous red fireworks instantly bloomed enchantingly under the white clouds and blue sky, dazzling and dazzling. The people outside did not stop Tang En's action. After retracting their gazes from the fireworks in the air, they were still expressionless. Of course, they could see that this was a signal arrow to call for reinforcements, but what was the point? In the current situation, was there anyone in the world who could rescue people from here? Ridiculous. Tang En. Gulp. You are the assassin Tang En. Suddenly, the eldest prince, who was struggling to raise his head, fixed his gaze on the ordinary face that was close at hand. His Adam's apple that was pressed against the dagger suddenly moved. He reluctantly swallowed his saliva and cried out involuntarily. Tang En glanced at him and shrugged. His meaning was self-evident. In an instant, the surrounding atmosphere was in an uproar. A group of senior members of the Temple of Light looked at each other in dismay. Only then did they notice that this damned assassin looked somewhat familiar. They immediately thought of something and their expressions immediately became extremely ugly. It was actually the guy who was boasting a few days ago? Damn it! He actually succeeded in getting what he wanted. If Tang En was able to assassinate the Pope under heavy guard, it was a slap to the Temple of Light's face. Then, when he first said those words, which seemed to be a deliberate reminder, and then succeeded, it was completely trampling on the Temple of Light's face. Don't kill me. You can't kill me. After realizing Tang En's identity, the eldest prince's face instantly turned ashen. Although he was trying his best to maintain his dignity, his body had already begun to tremble uncontrollably. Don't worry, I won't kill you. Patting the eldest prince's shoulder in a seemingly friendly manner, Tang En comforted him with a sincere expression. You are now my protective talisman. At this moment, you will not leave today. The retired head commander, who had just regained his senses, was terrifyingly gloomy. He no longer hesitated as he stepped forward. Looking at Tang En, who was tightly gripping his long spear, he spoke with a murderous aura. Is that so? Then. Pause for a while. Tang En smiled. Under everyone's gaze, he casually flicked his wrist. The dagger gently swept across the eldest prince's neck. The sound of the wind whistling rose again. Clean and neat, he had slit the throat. Let's try. His figure rapidly retreated. Like a ghost, he instantly flipped over the railing pond and swept across the top of the knights' heads. Ugh! Your Highness. Tang En's choice to break out, or rather, to put up a last-ditch struggle, was not unexpected. After all, even ants cherish their lives, let alone a master like this. However, no one expected Tang En to be this straightforward, or rather, shameless. Just a moment ago, he seemed to have made a sincere promise not to kill. But now, after killing the Pope, he was going to kill the future king. He was going to do this so casually. Motherf *Cur, this was completely out of the ordinary. That retired head commander was not stunned by this. Of course, it could be because he didn't care about the eldest prince's life or death. However, he did not chase after Tang En immediately because Tang En had pushed the eldest prince's body over and blocked his path of pursuit. Bastard, bastard, bastard. Holding the first prince's corpse and watching Twain's figure disappear across the pond, the head knight was like an enraged beast. He was on the verge of going berserk as he roared at the temple guards, "Kill, kill, kill! Chase after him and kill him!" After a pause, he casually threw the eldest prince's body to the old nobleman who was crying and crying. He then ran towards the direction where Tang En disappeared and roared again, "Quick! Activate the island's defensive magic circle. Don't give that bastard a chance to escape. Where is the light magician? Damn it! Release a detection spell and find out where he is. I want to kill him with my own hands." Chem? Before he could finish his sentence, the retired head commander seemed to have noticed something. He immediately stopped in his tracks and subconsciously turned his head towards the southern sky. His expression was confused at first, but it quickly changed. This power. Chapter 1109. P.S. If you want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions, please search for ktred on WeChat and follow it. Give more support to the strongest killer system. A few minutes ago, it was almost noon, in a ravine a few miles away from the lakeside. Didn't you say that you would make a move today? Why haven't you made a move yet? That unreliable guy didn't remember it wrong, did he? Or maybe he's already been caught. Ahem, why are you looking at me like that? I'm just saying. Under the hostile gazes of the surrounding members of the gray space, Philip rubbed his nose and lowered his voice. In the end, he wisely shut his mouth. You have to be patient. Little Tang will do it. Wu Ding raised his head and looked at the sky. Although his tone was indifferent, he spoke with great certainty. Why? Because if I were an assassin, I would choose to make a move too. Wu Ding narrowed his turbid eyes and looked at the island in the distance. The defense of the temple is very good. It can be said that it's watertight. But for an assassin who only needs a chance to make a move, this means little. Now that the Crown Prince and dozens of people have landed on the island together, and they are holding a celebration and so on, whether it's intentional or not, it will bring some chaos to the temple. This is the best opportunity to make a move. Philip opened his mouth and subconsciously wanted to refute, but in the end, he just sighed quietly and remained silent. To be honest, Philip was in a dilemma. On one hand, he hoped that his good friend Tang En would succeed and retreat successfully. On the other hand, He hoped that Tang En would not find a chance to make a move, because then his grandfather would not have to make the last move in his life. It was precisely because of these conflicting emotions that Philip felt a little nervous now. He was worried about Tang En's safety, but he also wished that Tang En would be caught and put an end to it. Elder Wu, you said that you could help the boss escape safely. What do you want to do? Compared to the conflicted Philip, Michaud and the others were extremely calm. They had almost blind confidence in Tang En. Even if the target was the Pope, they believed that Tang En would be able to assassinate him. Therefore, the focus of their attention was on how Tang En would safely retreat from the island after he succeeded. To an assassin, the assassination itself was not the most difficult part. The difficult part was how to retreat. However, when Michaud saw the silent space Magus suddenly raise his white eyebrows, he realized that his attitude was a little inappropriate. He waved his hand apologetically and said, "I'm sorry, Elder Wu. Please don't misunderstand. We absolutely believe in you, but…" It's fine." Wu Ding waved his hand and interrupted them. He smiled and said, "I can see that you are all very worried about Lil Tang. It is normal for you to have doubts. Furthermore, the overall strength of the temple headquarters is astonishing. It is indeed difficult to harm them with ordinary methods. Let me explain," the white-haired old magician suddenly said. After a pause, Wu Ding shrugged. "All right, you're a professional. You do it." The old magician nodded and pointed to the island in the distance. Looking at Michaud and the others, he asked directly, "Do you know why this island has existed for thousands of years?" The members of the gray space looked at each other in confusion. Harry scratched his head. "Isn't it because the temple is so powerful that no one dares to provoke it?" Michaud shook his head. "That's not what I meant. You've misunderstood. I'm only referring to this island, not the temple headquarters." The old magician emphasized and then explained, "Things change and the stars change. This is the law of nature. Nothing can go against it. No matter if it was a sturdy rock or a huge tree that even 10 people couldn't wrap their arms around, under the wind and rain, under the flow of time, everything would decline and change, and even become a handful of yellow sand. But this island isn't like that. It stood here 1,000 years ago, and today, 1,000 years later, it's still here, and there's almost no change. Do you know why? That was the logic. The old magician only needed to explain it a little, and Harry and the others immediately understood. Yes, nothing can escape the word change. Even if it can avoid all kinds of natural disasters, it absolutely can't escape the judgment of time. This is the truth since ancient times. But how can this famous island in front of them, which is said to have not fallen for thousands of years, exist until now? Could it be magic? Michaud thought of Wu Ding's attitude just now, and he suddenly thought of something. To be precise, it's a magic array. The only well-preserved large ancient magic array on the whole continent. The old magician nodded first, then shook his head and sighed. There are not many forces in the world that have a history of thousands of years. Only the Temple of Light, the Bran Royal Court, and the Sirius Royal Family in the northern wilderness are half of them. But there are too many objective factors, so let's not talk about them. For example, the Bran Royal Court has the longest history of the three, but the disputes of the royal power have been chaotic since ancient times. Although the inheritance has never been broken, the gap between the generations will only worsen. Only the Temple of Light, because of its special nature, has been passed down steadily and orderly from generation to generation. There is almost no chaos. Not only is there little loss, but with the passage of time, the accumulation is deeper and deeper. People often say that the heritage of the temple is the so-called heritage of thousands of years. Just like this large ancient magic array that can maintain the foundation of the island for thousands of years, only the temple can have it intact. It was common knowledge that every magician was a knowledgeable and competent scholar. And this old magician was obviously even more abnormal. He was almost at the level of a professor or an old pedant. Even though the magic array of the temple was a secret that was hard for the common people to know, it seemed to be very easy for him to talk about it. However, obviously, it was not a good time to talk about the secrets of the temple. Everyone was not very interested in the secrets of the temple. Following the old magician's train of thought, Michaud quickly grasped the key point and thoughtfully guessed. You mean, Elder Wu destroyed the ancient magic array, and then shook the foundation of the temple, and then created chaos on the island to help Boss break out of the encirclement? That's pretty much it, but, hee. Pausing for a moment, the old magician turned his head and looked at Wu Ding. The corner of his mouth raised into a dangerous smile. If we really destroy the ancient magic array, then the consequences won't be as simple as just creating chaos. Perhaps you don't know, but magic is much more mysterious and dangerous than you think. This well-functioning ancient magic array has protected the temple for thousands of years, and its terrifying power is enough to shock the world. However, from another point of view, this is also a double-edged sword. If the magic array collapses, the backfire effect is equivalent to 1,000 years of accumulation, and then the island What will happen? Philip unconsciously swallowed his saliva and asked nervously. The old magician spread out his hands and replied in a relaxed manner. Maybe it will collapse, separate, or directly turn into ashes. Who knows? As soon as his words fell, the surroundings suddenly became silent. Although everyone was mentally prepared, when they heard that the temple may one day cease to exist, they were still shocked speechless. A moment later, Michaud took a deep breath, and his eyes were as calm as water. He asked, "Where is the ancient magic array?" The old magician looked at Michaud in surprise and couldn't help but gently nod, secretly admiring the latter's calm mind. Then he raised his hand and pointed to the island in the distance. "Look carefully, it is there, very conspicuous." Perhaps the temple has the idea of declaring its strength. After all, the temple does have the qualifications to do so. But from my personal point of view, the temple's move is a bit too arrogant and quite unwise. He just sighed and didn't say it clearly, but this wasn't much different from directly revealing the mystery. Hearing this, Michaud, Philip, and the others subconsciously turned their heads to look, and immediately understood. On the island in the middle of the holy lake, the most eye-catching thing was not the majestic staircase of the temple, but the towering statue of the god of light that seemed to be able to hold up the heavens and earth. Under the brilliant light, the white jade statue was shining brightly, and it was really dazzling. Staring at the towering statue, Harry subconsciously opened his mouth and murmured in a low voice, "So blatant. It is indeed arrogant. No, it is just idiotic enough." Wu Ding's impression of the Temple of Light was as bad as ever, so when he heard this, he disapprovingly curled his lips and did not hide the ridicule on his face. At this time, suddenly, a loud bang sounded. An even more dazzling and brilliant firework covered the god's head, and in an instant, it bloomed enchantingly in front of everyone's eyes, filling the sky with flowing colors. The scene stagnated for a moment and then, this is, fuck. Boss did it. Haha. The people who reacted could not hide their excitement, especially Michaud and the other members of the gray space, who jumped out of the ravine and could not help but look up to the sky and laugh. Haha, good boy. Wu Ding slowly climbed up and looked up at the fireworks in the sky. The corners of his mouth unconsciously raised slightly, and he sighed with emotion. In the end you still succeeded. The Pope is dead? The most shocked person on the scene was undoubtedly the old magician. He was only invited by Wu Ding to help, and he did not know Tang En himself, so he did not care about him. Now, just looking at the fireworks in the sky and thinking about the significance of this, he could not help but smack his lips and sigh dryly. The era of the Temple of Light is over. Yes, it's over. Wu Ding narrowed his eyes and agreed. The complex meaning contained in this simple sentence could only be understood by old monsters like them who had lived for hundreds of years and experienced all kinds of prosperity and vicissitudes of the world. He patted the old magician on the shoulder. In that case, old friend, let us send it on its way again and completely bury it. Ha, it's not my honor. But grandfather. Hearing the words beside him, Philip, who was jumping and celebrating with Michaud and the others, froze in place as if he was suddenly cast a spell, and he looked like he was about to cry. Yes, since Tangan had succeeded now, then naturally, it was his grandfather's turn. His grandfather, Wu Ding, was naturally his grandfather's turn. Give me the sword. Wu Ding spread out his old palm and looked at Philip calmly. The latter subconsciously held the sword and stepped back, only shaking his head. Seeing this, Wu Ding shook his head and sighed softly. Why do you still not understand? Don't be sad, in this world, there is nothing that is immortal. The sword is like this, and so is the God of Swords. Now that I have merged with the sword and destroyed this decaying temple that is said to be unbeatable for thousands of years, it is exactly the reason. This is also the reason why I did not waste my time in this world. Sighing, he reached out his hand and took the tacky golden ringed blade from Philip's arms. He weighed it lightly in his hand. Looking at Philip, who was still in a daze, Wu Ding chuckled and said his last words. After I leave, the family is not allowed to interfere in the affairs of the empire. After saying this, he turned around and nodded lightly to the old magician. The latter nodded slightly, one hand holding Wu Ding's shoulder, the other holding the magic staff, and after a few groups of vague and strange syllables, a bright light flashed, and the two figures disappeared in an instant immediately, a short moment later. In the midst of the exclamations from the four shores of the lake, a huge golden sword shadow that seemed to be able to cut through heaven and earth suddenly appeared from the void, ferocious and terrifying. The body of the sword was majestic, and the edge of the blade was insufferably sharp. After a slight pause, revealing a domineering posture, the huge sword shadow carried a terrifying momentum that could cut through heaven and earth, and instantly crossed the lake and slashed towards the center of the island with a loud bang, as if it had sensed the moment of life and death. Just as the domineering blade light was about to slash down, various colors of brilliance suddenly burst out from all over the island. They converged and merged together, instantly forming a cocoon-like oval defensive shield that protected the island. In the next moment, the sword shadow collided, and a loud bang shook the sky. The thousands of hectares of lake water around the island suddenly soared into the sky, like a curtain that connected the sky, and also like a waterfall that flowed backwards, instantly covering the entire island completely. Walala, through the splashing water, a colorful light could be faintly seen flowing within. The defensive shield was not broken, and the huge sword shadow was slightly repelled, as if it was a draw. However, in the next moment, a flustered and exasperated roar suddenly came from the island. This power, it's you again! The scene before them was indeed not unfamiliar to the Divine Hall headquarters. About half a year ago, there was a similarly terrifying sword shadow that attacked the island. Then, it split open the outer defensive shield and left, leaving the Divine Hall headquarters with a great deal of humiliation. As the saying goes, the first time is unfamiliar, the second time is familiar. Since it succeeded last time, it was obvious that this time would not be an exception. Sure enough, after the sword shadow retreated slightly and pulled out a diving distance. First, there was a faint snort, and then a thunderous roar suddenly resounded through the world. Break! The strongest skill of the sword god, World Annihilation Sword. Oh no, now it's World Annihilation Sword. In an instant, the golden light shone brightly, and the layers of sword shadows were like swimming dragons, flashing and disappearing. With just a flash, the seemingly impregnable seven-colored cocoon below split into two like an eggshell from its weakest point, revealing the entire island inside. This was not the end. It was just the beginning. The domineering sword shadow that broke the outer defensive shield was unstoppable, like a comet falling to the earth. Under the horrified gazes of countless clergymen inside, it fell straight and accurately at the center of the island, where the towering statue of the deity stood. No. Boom, boom, boom. My novel, The Strongest Killer System, will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform, and there's also a 100% chance of a lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign at the top right to add friend, search for the public account Kdred, and follow it. Hurry up! Chapter 11:10. P.S. If you want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions, search for the official WeChat account Kdred, and follow it to give more support to the strongest killer system. Boom. 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 Perhaps the master god of fate had never been a good boy, but more like a temperamental brat. Therefore, when we look at the world's affairs, we will always find such a bloody hidden law: blessings never come in pairs, and misfortunes never come singly. This was definitely not nonsense, it was based on facts. For example, right now, when countless clerics had yet to recover from the shock of the assassination of both the Pope and the Crown Prince, they were stunned to see that the impregnable outer barrier of the island was easily breached. Then, the holy statue that symbolized the pillar of faith crumbled under the evil radiance of the blade, wailing as it fell to the mortal world. At this moment, whether it was the clergymen who were chasing or giving orders, they were all dumbfounded. They stared blankly at the towering statue that had stood there for thousands of years. They thought that it would stand there forever, but now it was covered by endless dust and smoke. They were numb, and they couldn't make a sound. Some nuns and handymen who had weaker psychological defenses couldn't help but cover their faces and cry when the statue was destroyed. An era had passed. Somewhere, Tang En, who was running for his life, couldn't help but stop. He looked back at the ruined statue in the distance, raised his eyebrows, and calmly looked away. Then, he turned around and faced the south, staring at the blue sky in a daze. There, the domineering sword energy just now had disappeared. All that was left was a shining star falling from the sky. After a moment of silence, he bowed, bent, and saluted at a 90-degree angle. This was a salute, a thank you, and a farewell. For outsiders, with the complete collapse of the God of Faith, the era of the Temple of Light had officially come to an end. But as the person involved, Tang En was still clear about one thing. That was, at this very moment, an era that was not inferior to the former in terms of meaning or glory had quietly passed. Sword God, Elder Wu, please have a safe journey. Generally speaking, with the end of an era, it often meant the official arrival of a new era. This was the evolution of the laws of nature. However, this rule was untenable under the current circumstances. Here, the end of an era was accompanied by the fall of another era. Wu Ding, who had guarded the empire his whole life, finally chose to use up all his strength to cut down the Temple of Light from the throne. It was a pity that not many people knew about such a magnificent feat. At least, the people in the Divine Hall did not know about it, nor would they have thought about it. Right now, they could only watch as the Father God's incarnation was suddenly chopped into a pile of ruins, and then, their feet kept trembling. That's not right. It was as if the entire island was shaking. It was as if there was a huge dragon under the island that had just woken up and could not wait to flip over. Following that, waves of intense tremors and shaking became clearer and more obvious. Was it an illusion? Or was it because the statue was destroyed, and God blamed them for not protecting it well, so thunder was angry and punished them? Just as everyone was bewildered and uncertain, suddenly, boom! Another thunderous sound was heard, and a pillar of dust rose into the sky. On the stone path in the center of the island, a group of high-ranking members of the Divine Hall, who had just regained their senses, were instantly thrown to the ground by the noisy airwaves. They screamed and rolled on the ground in embarrassment. The scene instantly became chaotic. When they crawled up from the ground, their faces covered in dust, they subconsciously turned their heads and saw that at the end of the stone path, the main hall that was originally used to hold the coronation ceremony had collapsed under the smoke and dust. Broken walls and fences were everywhere. They looked at each other in dismay. What happened? Damn it! Did someone else sneak in? No, this agitated magic element. That's not right. Well, although they had witnessed the collapse of the statue with their own eyes, they still did not think that there would be a problem with the ancient magic array. Their thinking was a bit strange. But to be honest, these high-ranking members of the Divine Hall who were still confused couldn't be blamed. The phenomenon of darkness under the light was normal. Moreover, unless it was someone like Wu Ding who had a clear goal from the beginning, who would remember that an ancient magic array was buried here 1,000 years ago. Yes, that's right, these high-ranking members of the Divine Hall had spent most of their lives walking around this magic array. But weren't all people like this? They always paid attention to other people's things, but turned a blind eye to what they already had. Fortunately, just because they couldn't remember it now didn't mean that they would never remember it. When the dozen or so high-ranking members of the temple who possessed the strength of archmages heard the unusual warning, they subconsciously released their senses. They sensed that the light magical elements around them that were originally as gentle as water suddenly surged with great waves, as if a hurricane had passed through a turbulent sea surface. As they did so, a memory that had been sealed in their minds for a long time was gradually awakened. In the next moment, with a swoosh, the dozen or so white heads suddenly turned and looked in the same direction, the collapsed statue of the god. Their expressions instantly turned ashen, as if they had lost their parents. It's over. This time, it's completely over. It shook again, and continued to shake. It was as if they were riding on a broken boat that didn't pass the quality test, barely sailing on a stormy sea. Not only was the hull on the verge of collapse, but the people on the boat were dizzy and numb. This was the first feeling Sylvia had when she woke up from her dream in a room in the corner of the Divine Hall. She opened her eyes, frowned, and punched the edge of the bed with a bang. Her face was full of displeasure and anger. Yes, I can understand, the emotions of a pregnant woman in labor are so unstable. Fortunately, our Lord Head Knight Sylvia wasn't an ordinary pregnant woman. After barely suppressing her desire to curse, she instantly realized the abnormality in her surroundings. Beside her ears, there was a continuous rumble that sounded like a house being torn down and a wall being smashed. There were also faint screams outside the door. Hesitating, she reached out her hand and touched the edge of the bed. Under her palm, there was a continuous shaking. The teacup on the wooden cabinet at the head of the bed, the water that had long cooled down, rippled in circles. Earthquake? It can't be. Sylvia blinked her eyes in confusion. Thinking about it, the Divine Hall on the island didn't seem to have a history of natural or man-made disasters. Immediately, she raised her head and shouted outside the door, "Mia, Mia? Where did you go? Mia?" There was no response. Frowning, she asked, "Who is guarding outside the door? Come in and answer me." Xia Weian was no longer the holy head commander she used to be. Instead, she was now an authentic captive. With her great reputation in the Divine Hall, and her valiant battle record, even if the Pope personally made a move to restrict her, the Divine Hall still couldn't let their guard down. Of course, there would be no shortage of guards to keep an eye on things. But now, Sylvia called out a few times, and the guards outside the door, who should have immediately pushed open the door and entered the room, did not move for a long time. Seeing this, Sylvia was stunned. She quickly realized something, but she wasn't sure. Thinking about it, she simply lifted the blanket and put on her clothes. She got off the bed and slowly walked to the door with her big belly. Creak. She opened the wooden door and looked around. Outside the door was a long and quiet corridor. Sylvia's room was in the middle of the corridor. Other than that, there were thick stone walls on both sides of the corridor. Overall, it was a qualified place for house arrest. As expected, The two sides of the door and the corridor that were supposed to have a sentry every 3 steps and a guard every 5 steps had all disappeared. In her line of sight, there wasn't a single divine hall guard. What's going on? Could it be he's here to make a move? This he was, of course, referring to Tang-en. Sylvia frowned and muttered to herself. She didn't immediately take the opportunity to escape. Of course, with her current physical condition, she wouldn't be able to escape if no one came to rescue her. Just as she was thinking, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from the corner of the corridor on her right. Sylvia turned her head and saw a familiar figure turn the corner. He lowered his head and tidied up the knight's armor that seemed to be a little mismatched as he hurried over. She looked up. Owens? Sylvia suddenly widened her eyes and looked at this familiar partner in a daze. She was inexplicably surprised. How did you get in? Hi, long time no see, Sylvia. He smiled and waved his hand. Did I wake you up? What a failure. I wanted to give you a surprise, haha. Shaking his head regretfully, Owens quickly walked closer. As for how we got in, well, guess. Paused for a while, pointed at his feet and answered his own question. Ha, just kidding. We came in from underground. Underground? Underground sewer? Sylvia's understanding of the Divine Hall headquarters was without a doubt. Hearing this, she was stunned for a moment and immediately understood. She quickly reached out to grab Owens's arm and asked impatiently, "Where is he?" "He's here too. Where is he now?" Hearing this, Owens suddenly looked helpless. "Oh, Sylvia, you disappoint me. We have known each other for so many years and came all the way here to save you. You don't even care about what's with that look?" Okay, I'm scared of you. You're pregnant, you're the biggest." Meeting Sylvia's obviously hostile gaze, Owens could not help but smile bitterly and spread his hands. "I don't know where he is now. A few days ago, after entering the underground sewer, we split up. But don't worry. Try to run your combat energy. Well, just a little bit will do. Be careful not to affect the baby." "Run my combat energy? Why?" Although she was very dissatisfied with Owens's talkative style of not answering questions directly, Sylvia still frowned and stretched out her fist. "My power has been restricted by the Pope himself." Before her voice fell, the surface of her tightly clenched fist was suddenly covered with a layer of faint holy light. It shrunk indefinitely, indicating the hidden explosive power. There was no doubt that this was the sacred combat energy that only belonged to the warriors of the temple. Ha! Owen's expression suddenly became extremely complicated when he saw this. He seemed to be smiling and sighing with emotion. In the end, he raised his head and shook his head with an inconceivable tone. "I didn't expect that he would really succeed." Sylvia stared blankly at the flickering combat energy in her palm. She was also speechless. Some words did not need to be said, because the facts had already proven everything. Sylvia was able to regenerate her combat energy under the condition of being restricted. This undoubtedly meant that the restriction on her body had been removed. From another point of view, it was very likely that the person who had placed the restriction was dead. And regardless of whether Sylvia and Owens were willing to admit it or not, or what their current attitude was, the two of them were indeed from the temple headquarters. In this way, they were not strangers to the supreme ruler of this place. In fact, with their previous rank of Holy Head Commander, they had many opportunities to meet the kind old man. Perhaps they had even received encouragement and praise from the other party. Now that they learned that the other party had suddenly died, and not long ago, it would be a lie to say that they did not feel anything at all. The corridor was silent, and the roar of distant and near became more frequent. After a moment, "Okay, let's not think about it." Shaking his head, Owens was the first to recover. He stepped forward and held Sylvia's arm. "Time is of the essence. Now that the ancient magic circle protecting the island has been destroyed, I think this place will completely collapse. We have to hurry up and retreat and leave the island. What? Collapse? What about him? Come on, you are giving birth to a child, how can your IQ drop? Even if we are all caught, do you think anything will happen to him? Don't worry, the outer defensive shield of the island has been destroyed, now no one can stop him from escaping. At this point, Owens's voice suddenly stopped, and he suddenly turned his head. His eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. Who is it? Sylvia, who had recovered her strength, was naturally alert. She also heard the movement behind her, but it was a little difficult for her to move. When she slowly turned around, Owens, who was leaning forward like a wild leopard, was about to pounce with his spear. Hey! Weiwei, why did you come out? At the other end of the corridor, Sylvia's childhood friend, Mia, was hurriedly pushing something that looked like a wheelchair around the corner. Then, she shifted her gaze and saw Owens's unnatural figure from afar. She could not help but frown. Who are you? The other guards. Mia's words paused, and she did not continue to ask. There was no need to ask. The temple guards would not leave their posts at this time, unless they were quietly killed, or directly knocked out and carried away. Looking at Owens's unfamiliar face, and the knight's armor that was obviously not the right size, everything became clear. Damn it! Owens's eyes twitched, but he did not immediately rush forward to solve the problem. This did not mean that he knew this beautiful young woman in front of him, but in the other direction behind the young woman, there were sounds of footsteps and the crisp sound of armor colliding with each other. There were obviously a lot of people. Owens was not afraid of fighting. With his strength as a holy head commander, even if Sylvia could not help him now, as long as he was careful and paid attention to avoid the mages, there was almost no one in the temple headquarters who could stop him. At least, it would not be a problem for him to protect Sylvia until she reached the well. But the problem now was that he had just started the rescue operation. At this time, exposing his whereabouts too early would undoubtedly be disadvantageous. In the long and silent corridor, Sylvia, Owens, and Mia, who was standing at the corner, looked at each other with a distance of more than 10 feet between them. For a moment they were speechless. The novel, The Strongest Killer System, will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there will be a 100% lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend, search for the public account Kdred and follow. Hurry up! Chapter 11:11. The situation was urgent, and the stalemate in the corridor naturally couldn't last long. Or rather, this wasn't a stalemate in the first place. It was just a narrow path meeting at the wrong time. Mia quickly came back to her senses. She let go of the wheelchair handle and looked at Sylvia with a smile. Haha, looks like I came at the wrong time. Mia. Sylvia didn't expect things to be so coincidental, and she didn't know how to respond for a moment. What should I say? Playing the friendship card to make the other party turn a blind eye and let her go? Stop fooling around. This isn't Sylvia's character at all. She couldn't do this because it would harm her. She waved her hand and interrupted. This is that little man of yours? Haha, a hero saving a damsel in distress. Quite handsome. Looking at Owens, whose expression instantly became strange, Mia casually retracted her gaze and looked down. Do you know? Weiwei, I've actually always envied you. No, I should say I've been jealous of you since we were young. Mia, you misunderstood. Sylvia, who was about to shake her head and deny it, was stunned when she heard that. She looked at Mia, who was retreating, in shock and hesitantly asked, What did you say? Didn't hear clearly? Or are you too shocked to believe it? Haha, you didn't hear wrongly. I'm jealous. Mia looked up with a faint smile that seemed to be mocking and self-deprecating at the same time. She spread her hands and said, Look, you're better than me in almost everything. Your faith is firmer than mine, your cultivation talent is higher than mine, your looks and figure are about the same as mine. More importantly, Our starting points are clearly not that far apart, but someone as talented as you is even more hard-working than us. This is simply making people despair, not giving them any way to survive. Seriously, what she said was too damn right. Isn't this person a pervert? Owens raised his eyebrows and glanced at Sylvia beside him. He nodded empathetically and expressed his agreement. Then, without batting an eyelid, he moved his spear forward, stepped forward, and kicked with a light smack. Owens, who had not made a decision, decisively launched a surprise attack. His spear was suddenly pressed down by Sylvia's hand. "I'm sorry." Sylvia pursed her lips and looked at her childhood friend who was more than 10 feet away. Her gaze was complicated. "I don't know what to say. In short, it seems like I did something wrong. I'm sorry." "No, you're not wrong. You're really not wrong." Mia shook her head and regained her composure. "We were the ones who were wrong. In fact, you were right all along. Your hard work and perseverance did not disappoint you. You became the only female holy head commander in the Temple Knight. You became the flower of the knights, and you even found a good man who was willing to die to save you. And I can only be someone's mistress, committing myself to an old man." At this point, Mia lowered her beautiful face, and her tone gradually became gloomy. Then, she suddenly took a deep breath and shrugged her shoulders. She raised her hand and quickly fiddled with her long hair, messing up her originally meticulously groomed hairstyle. Mia, you." Sylvia was also a little confused at this time. She did not understand what this childhood friend, who was so familiar yet now a little strange, was thinking. "All right, that's all for now." At this moment, Mia, who was dressed a little disheveled, suddenly raised her head and looked at Sylvia at eye level. She playfully blinked and revealed a big, bright smile. "You must be happy, my good sister who makes people envious." After saying that, she pushed her hand, and the wheelchair-like object instantly smoothly rushed out in front of the stunned Sylvia and Mia. As for Mia, she instantly retreated and turned around to rush into the corner. Then, a scream sounded. A heart-wrenching scream of panic was heard. "Not good, not good, that little bitch Xiao Weian jumped out of the window and escaped. Someone come quickly. Come quickly. You guys came just in time. Quick, 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 retreat. It'll be too late if you're late. Go around to the other side and block her. She can't escape far. Quick." Listening to the chaotic shouting and commands at the end of the corridor and the chaotic footsteps that were gradually getting further away, Owens blinked again as he looked at the wooden wheelchair that slowly slid in front of him. After a moment, he exhaled and looked at Sylvia, who was smiling at the side. "Your friend?" She nodded affirmatively. "Yes, my best friend. I can see that. It's just that she's a little breathless when she speaks. Let's go." Dust and smoke rose everywhere. Amidst the continuous explosions, the tremors became more and more intense. Under the cover of the restless magical elements that could not be seen by the naked eye, buildings began to collapse one after another in various parts of the island. Among them, the tall and majestic main buildings suffered the most damage. As if infected with some kind of deadly virus, the spread was extremely fast and chaotic. No one knew where the next loud bang would be, where the next explosion would be, and whether it would be right next to them. The scene became more and more chaotic. There were handymen who screamed in horror and ran around like headless flies. While they wanted to find a safe place for themselves, they were also constantly spreading panic. There were middle-level and high-ranking members of the Divine Temple who were angrily shouting orders, trying to maintain order and organize people to carry out rescue or encirclement. However, it could be seen that this action had little effect in this situation. There were also quiet god priests who stubbornly knelt in a certain building, closed their eyes and prayed, hoping that the god who had been worshipped by them for thousands of years in the underworld would appear to save them from the fire and calm the chaos. However, most of the time, the devout ones were completely buried by the collapsed buildings before they could wait for the God of their faith to come to be vigilant in times of peace. This was an eternal truth. It was a pity that the temple headquarters had been peaceful for too long, so long that they had completely forgotten how to deal with the chaos and disaster. They, who used to be high and mighty, really did not have any experience in this area. Even if there were high-ranking members of the temple who could keep a clear head, they did not know where to start. While hesitating, looking at the increasingly uncontrollable scene in front of them, the people in the temple could not help but be completely lost. Of course, there were always exceptions. Among these confused high-ranking members of the temple, there were a few people who had a clear goal. There. Quick, Burton, bring people to go around and block him. Block him! He's going to jump over the wall. No, he's coming this way. Attack, hold him back. Damn it! Where is he? Behind, Captain, be careful. Captain Burton sacrificed himself. The target fled to the east. I repeat, the target fled to the east. I see him. I see. Not good, quick, hide, the house is collapsing. I'm going to kill him with my own hands. Deafening roars, explosions, screams before death, and the loud explosions of the collapsing house, etc., all mixed together, one after another, and for a while, it did not stop. Just by looking at the chaotic scene, you could tell that the team led by the retired head commander was not going well. In reality, it was exactly so. Under such a chaotic environment, the difficulty of trying to capture Twain, who possessed the ability to accurately control a small area and came and went like the wind, was so great that it was completely no different than looking for a needle in a haystack. However, it was clear that the retired head commander, who was agitated by the tragic scene of the Pope's head being separated from his body, did not think this way. He watched as Tang En easily killed the people blocking him, elegantly bypassed the collapsed building, and instantly disappeared into the dust. Then, he turned to look at the messy team around him. It was a clumsy performance, and he immediately yelled like a madman. Mage, location, tell me where that bastard is now. Wait, Sir Head Commander, the magic elements here are very messy. The old mage who was waving his magic staff was sweating profusely. Found him. South, he's south. He's behind us. Damn it, he's provoking us. Obviously, he had temporarily escaped from the pursuit, but instead of retreating, he went back and circled to the back of the pursuers again. If this was not a provocation, then what was? Phew. Chase. The retired head commander took a deep breath. His whole body was trembling, and he could not help but roar, "Why are you still standing here like idiots? Chase. Yes, sir." The surrounding temple knights trembled when they heard the order, and they hurriedly chased after him. At this moment, a knight suddenly yelled and ran over, Sir Head Commander, phew. Sylvia escaped, what? The retired head commander, who was about to take a step forward, suddenly froze on the spot. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. What did you say? Sylvia escaped. That's not right, sir. The middle-aged knight who looked like a captain suddenly thought of something and said in horror, Not good, it's a diversion. Damn it, that bastard is not provoking us. He's just leading us in circles to buy time so that Sylvia can escape. No. With Sylvia's current condition, it's impossible for her to escape alone. Someone else must have snuck onto the island. It was easy to deduce the cause by the cause. The difficult part was how to make a decision. Now there were two choices in front of them. One was to continue chasing Tang En, and the other was to capture Sylvia. To be honest, the success rate of both was not very high. Needless to say, Tang En's situation had already proven everything. While Sylvia's situation seemed easy, it was not. For the former, they could at least use magic to find Tang En's location. However, Sylvia and Owens were different. They were originally from the temple, and they practiced the power of light element. There was no way they could use magic to quickly find clues. Continue, Chase. The retired head commander was very decisive. Or maybe he did not even think about it. He quickly made a decision with a ferocious face. He waved his spear and roared, "We only have one goal, kill that bastard." Yes. Chapter 11-12. This is the retreat route you guys came up with? Owens, are you sure you're not joking with me? After Mia lured away the first wave of pursuers, Owens pushed Sylvia, who was sitting in the wheelchair, out of the prison corridor without any obstructions. At this time, the chaos on the island had reached an extremely serious level. Almost everywhere they went, they would bump into people from the temple, or wounded knights and guards, or nuns running around in disarray, and so on. However, it was precisely because they had no time to care about the chaos around them that Sylvia and Roland managed to sneak their way through. They safely traveled more than 1,000 feet and arrived at a small courtyard. This should be a place used to fetch water and wash up. Around the ancient well in the center of the courtyard, there were wooden buckets of water, as well as wooden basins of various sizes used for washing and rinsing. It seemed to be a bit messy. There was limited time to escape, so Owens naturally had a special purpose for bringing Sylvia into this courtyard instead of retreating. In fact, that was indeed the case. That ancient well was the exit of the passage that Owens had jumped onto earlier. If they could exit, they could naturally enter. Owens' plan was to bring Sylvia into the ancient well, then return along the route that he had used to sneak in. Finally, they would safely leave the island without anyone noticing. It should be said that Owens' plan sounded very reliable. However, looking at the ancient well in front of her, Sylvia, who was sitting in the wooden wheelchair, frowned and looked up at Owens with a strange expression. "Are you sure you want me to enter from here?" "Of course." Owens quickly kicked away the wooden buckets and basins that were scattered around the ancient well, and explained comfortingly, "Don't worry, I've asked around and know that pregnant women shouldn't touch cold water. I've already led the well water below to another passage. Also, although the underground passage is a little narrow, you don't have to worry. You just have to lie on the wooden plank after you go down, and I'll push you forward." After a short pause, he waved his hand confidently and concluded, "In short, leave everything to me. It won't have any effect on the baby in your belly." "You're quite thoughtful." Sylvia pinched the space between her eyebrows, then sighed and pointed at the ancient well. "Then, may I ask, how do I go down through the well?" "Go down?" Owens blinked in confusion. "Just go down like this, huh?" Owens suddenly paused. Looking at Sylvia's silent action of gently stroking her swollen belly, he suddenly realized something. His expression immediately became unusually interesting. He suddenly turned his head to look at the narrow well, then turned his head to look at Sylvia's belly, then turned his head to look at the well again. They turned their heads stiffly back and forth like puppets. The atmosphere was awkward and silent. Clang, clang, clang. A huge blunder that shocked the ancient and dazzled the contemporaries appeared out of nowhere. Yes, that's right. Don't doubt your judgment. The fact was that with Sylvia's current swollen body, especially with her protruding belly, it was impossible for her to pass through the narrow well in front of them. She was destined to be stuck. Every plan had its flaws. Every plan had its flaws. No matter if it was Owens, who was staring at the well in a daze, or Tang En, who was leading the pursuers of the temple in circles, they would never have thought that their rescue plan, which had been carefully deliberated several times, would have such a huge blunder. 9 mountains for a mountain, and a failure at the final stage? Wasn't this a joke? But then again, this blunder was easy to understand. After all, Tang En and the others were all men, and they were still single. They seriously lacked relevant experience, so how could they know the huge waistline of a pregnant woman? After a moment of silence, Owens's cheek muscles twitched, then twitched again. He took a deep breath, coughed twice, and decisively turned the wooden wheelchair around. "There's still time. Let's find another place. Plans could not keep up with changes. There was absolutely no way for Sylvia to go down the ancient well in front of them. If they forced their way down, it would be very easy for them to bump into something. This was a risk that Owens and Sylvia did not dare to take. Therefore, they could only give up their original plan now and find another spacious ancient well. The island of the temple was not small, and there were even more ancient wells. With Sylvia and Roland's familiarity with this place, it was naturally not difficult to find another suitable ancient well. But before Owens could push Sylvia out of the courtyard, a shout suddenly came from behind them. "Stop!" A small team of more than 10 knights rushed into the courtyard against the grey smoke that filled the sky. They looked up and saw Owens and Roland leaving with their backs facing them. They shouted, "Where did you come from? Did you see any traces of outsiders?" Owens paused and lowered his head with a frown. He knew that the time limit of Mia's cover had passed. There was no doubt that these were the pursuers who came to search for them. Fortunately, because he was disguised as a low-level knight, the other party did not immediately suspect him. Owens thought for a moment and turned his body slightly to block Sylvia's figure. He bowed his head and said, "Captain, we came from the east side of the side hall. My companion was injured and was about to send him for treatment. We did not notice any traces of outsiders." Of course, Owens did not care about this small team of knights. But after all, he was not Tangun. He was not confident that he could kill these knights instantly without any warning. So, it would be best if he could pass through safely without alerting the enemy. That small team leader did not see through Owens's disguise. In fact, he was just casually asking. Hearing this, he simply nodded and waved his hand. "Okay. Brothers, let's go ahead and take a look." Before his voice died away, a low-level knight at the side sized up Owens, who was leaning sideways and lowering his head, with a puzzled expression. He felt that Owens looked familiar. Suddenly, his eyes widened and he exclaimed, "Owens? You are Sir Knight Owens's man?" F***ck. Owens, who had already turned around and was ready to leave, suddenly froze. He was very depressed. Was this the tragedy of being a famous person? "I have already disguised myself like this, and you can still recognize me? Sir Owens? Didn't that betray? Damn it, it's them. Catch them. You are courting death." Seeing that his identity was exposed, Owens naturally did not hesitate. He decisively waved his spear and turned around, ready to pounce and annihilate the other party. However, at this time, the small team leader who ordered more than 10 knights to surround and attack hurriedly retreated and instantly flashed to the back of the crowd. Don't get me wrong, this was not the style of a leader in the modern world. On the contrary, this was an extremely wise reaction. Everyone knew that it was impossible for them to keep Owens and Sylvia. After all, the difference in strength was obvious. He wanted to take the opportunity to let out a long whistle to warn and summon the surrounding companions to encircle and annihilate. At this moment, suddenly, something happened. All of a sudden, an unforeseen event occurred. With a whoosh, a black brick-like shadow appeared out of nowhere and flew through the air. "Eat your grandfather's brick. Be careful." "What is that?" The knight at the front suddenly looked up and felt that his vision suddenly turned black. A strong wind quickly smashed toward his head, and he instinctively raised his spear. His aim was good, accurately stabbing. However, at the next moment, boom! Flames rose and waves of air rolled. In the violent explosion, the figures of more than 10 knights were swallowed by the smoke in an instant. Then, they shot out of the smoke like cannonballs. Some of them smashed down the walls of the courtyard, some flew over the walls of the courtyard, and scattered in all directions. It was obvious that they were dead. Cha! Owens, who was about to pounce, saw the rolling waves of flames in front of him and quickly forced himself to stop. He roared and held his spear in front of his chest, erupting with a holy light to face it head-on. Behind him was the pregnant Sylvia, so naturally, he could not dodge. Fortunately, although the power of this change was not small, with his strength at the peak of Earth stage, he could still take it steadily. Of course, some embarrassment was inevitable, Jack. Cough cough. Your grandfather. Haha, isn't it your grandfather, Jack? That's right, looking back, who was jumping up from the ancient well like a groundhog? If it was not Jack, who was it? He looked up to the sky and laughed. I knew you couldn't handle it, as expected. You still have to rely on your grandfather, Jack, at the crucial moment. Haha. All right, although his tone was a little annoying, the truth was not false. Jack's sudden sneak attack and KO'd the small team of knights, and it did not arouse the slightest suspicion from the surrounding pursuers. What? You're asking about the loud explosion just now? Please, the temple lacked everything now, but it did not lack the sound of explosions. Cough cough. Owens, who was spitting out black smoke, rolled his eyes speechlessly. Why did you come out? Nonsense, half of the underground passage collapsed. If I didn't come out, would I be waiting for death? Jack rolled his eyes back and said in a bad mood. Then, he turned his gaze and saw Sylvia sitting on a wooden wheelchair. His expression suddenly changed, and he rubbed his hands together and leaned over like a lackey. This is sister-in-law Sylvia, right? Haha, you're indeed very charming. You may not know me, and let me introduce myself. My name is the great thief Jack, Tangen's brother. I've heard of you. Sylvia nodded politely. Thank you for coming to save me. It's my duty. Who asked me to be his brother? Haha. Alright, cut the crap. Owens walked over. You just said the underground passage collapsed? Then how should we retreat now? Also, what the hell did you throw just now? Don't worry, I've already docked the small rubber boat on the southern shore of the island. It's not far from here. We just have to take advantage of the chaos to kill our way over. As for the thing I threw just now, Jack simply opened his coat. See for yourself. See what scare. Owens casually glanced at it, and his expression suddenly changed. He subconsciously blocked in front of Sylvia, and once again held his spear in front of his chest, as if facing a formidable enemy. Magic lock. You took down the magic lock and brought it here? The red, blue, white fire element, water element, light element were tied around Jack's waist, clanging like small pieces of bricks entwined in a circle and colliding with each other. Weren't they the magic locks they encountered when they sneaked into the temple headquarters? Who would have thought that Jack actually took down the central explosive device of these magic locks one by one from the magic traps, and even tied them into a bundle and carried them on his body? No wonder the knight just casually fired a shot just now. It caused such a violent reaction. It should be known that this was 10 times more dangerous than the exploding crystal. In other words, the current Jack was simply a human-shaped self-propelled cannon. And a high-grade one with self-destruction, however, the person involved obviously didn't realize this, and rather proudly scratched his head. A thief never leaves empty-handed. Professional habit, purely professional habit, haha. Amidst the arrogant laughter, Owens and Sylvia looked at each other, and the corners of their mouths twitched at the same time. Then, without leaving a trace, they moved a few steps to the side to distance themselves. Chapter 11-13. With the addition of Jack, the effect was immediate. The running of the three-man team suddenly became much smoother. This did not mean that Jack was very strong. In fact, among the three of them, even Sylvia, who was not good at running, could easily suppress the weakest Jack. But all of this could not stop the awe-inspiring power of his humanoid self-propelled cannon. One had to know that the current situation was obvious. Shrines would always be blooming everywhere. The rumbling sounds of explosions were incessant, and people were dying every moment. As long as one wasn't blind, one could see that this place was destroyed. If they could leave an island as a foundation, it would be a blessing from the gods. Under such circumstances, it was naturally better for everyone on the island to leave as soon as possible. But since ancient times, religious believers had never been a group that could rely on reason to act. Even though they knew that a great disaster was imminent, there were still many people in the temple who acted as if they did not hear it. They carried out the orders to encircle Tang En and search for Sylvia, like moths flying into a flame. It was so touching that it made one's balls hurt. If it was only Owens and Sylvia, after their whereabouts were exposed, they would inevitably be slowed down by the endless waves of temple guards. No matter how strong Owens was, or how outstanding his marksmanship was, he would not be able to escape. He might even be entangled in the same place and be unable to move. In this way, when a few more experts from the temple heard the news and rushed over, they would meet a tragic end. Fortunately, they had Jack in the team, a completely unreasonable humanoid self-propelled cannon. As they headed south, whenever they encountered temple guards along the way, Jack would greet them with a bright smile before they could question him. He would give them a greeting gift and casually throw out a magic lock. And then, there was no more. After the rumbling explosion, the dust settled, the obstacles were cleared, and the road was unobstructed, clean and tidy. This was the effect they wanted. If the first prince had to court death and choose to be crowned today, it would be the right time. Jack had a flash of inspiration as he removed the magic lock and put it on his body. In addition, the collapsed buildings all over the island could also be seen as a geographical advantage. It was the former's incessant rumbling that masked the huge commotion caused by Jack's firecrackers, minimizing the impact to the minimum with such great luck. It was not surprising that Xia Weian and the other two arrived at the southern shore of the island in a short 10 minutes and successfully boarded the small rubber boat. "Sit tight. Quick, row the boat, row the boat." After Owens helped Sylvia onto the small dinghy, Jack did not dare to waste any time. He quickly cut the ropes, and the wooden oars flew. Amidst the splashing of water, he maneuvered the small dinghy like an arrow released from a bow. In an instant, he pulled a distance away from the shore of the island. Because of their unreasonable escape and Jack's good eyesight, the place where they hid the dinghy was well hidden. After they pulled a distance away from the island and looked back, there were no traces of their pursuers on the shore. Phew! Phew! Seeing this, the three-man team could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. It was as if they had unloaded a heavy burden and felt much more relaxed. It must be known that this was the temple headquarters. Even if it was chaotic now, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. It was indeed fortunate that they were able to escape safely. However, after pulling a little distance away, Jack stopped what he was doing and stopped paddling. Owens, who was reaching for the other wooden oar, was stunned. Why did you stop paddling? Look at my brain." Before he finished speaking, Owens instantly reacted. He raised his hand and patted his head, spreading his hands apologetically. "Sorry, I was a little excited and forgot about Brother Tang En. That was the reason." Although there were 3 of them when they came, Tang En had not killed his way out of the island yet. Perhaps from this point, it could be seen that Owens was not as calm as he appeared to be when he came to the rescue mission at the temple headquarters. After all, it was his old boss. Besides being familiar with him, it was normal for him to be wary. "How about we send a signal?" After hesitating, Owens looked at Jack. The latter looked at Sylvia subconsciously and then touched the signal arrow that he took out from his waist pouch. He was a little hesitant. The so-called signal referred to shooting a signal arrow to tell Tang En that they had successfully broken out of the encirclement and their current location so that Tang En could find them quickly. This was what they had agreed on beforehand. But when it came to it, Jack and the others were a little hesitant. The reason was very simple. Once a signal arrow was shot, of course, Tang En would not be the only one who could see it. The pursuers of the temple headquarters were not blind. They could naturally see the signal and follow it to this place. They might be faster than Tang En. Don't get me wrong. The reason why Jack and Owens were hesitant now was not because they were worried about their own safety after their whereabouts were exposed, but because Sylvia was lying on the side with her arms around her stomach. It was not easy to rescue her. If they fell in again because of this mistake, it would not be worth it. While they were hesitating, Sylvia suddenly said firmly, "Send the signal." She stretched out her hand and pointed to the island that was constantly roaring. The situation of the island is a little wrong. It seems like it's going to collapse. No, it's going to explode. We can't wait any longer. Send a signal immediately to get Tang En to come out. Hearing this, Jack and Selina could not help but be stunned. They subconsciously turned their heads to look and found that the island was indeed a little abnormal. The frequency of the trembling and shaking was increasing, causing the surrounding waters of the holy lake, which had always been as smooth as a mirror, to ripple. What was even more strange was that the dust that was raised due to the collapse of the building was not blown away by the lake wind. On the contrary, it was distorting and condensing irregularly, enveloping the sky above the island. From afar, it looked like the bloody mouth of a devil, ferocious and terrifying, eager to devour the food on the plate under its mouth. This is not good. Magic elemental backlash. Owen's expression suddenly changed greatly, and he cried out in alarm. Yes, this strange scene in front of them was the sign of magic elemental backlash. Just as Wu Ding's old friend, the old space magician, had said, magic not only represented mystery, but also extreme danger. And among the many dangers, if asked what a magician was most afraid of, it would undoubtedly be magic backlash. And don't forget that the source of this magic backlash was not as simple as a magician or a spell, but an ancient magic array that had been in operation for thousands of years. Once this thing really backfired and went all out, its terrifying power would cause even 100 sword gods to die in vain. F***ck. Seeing that Sylvia and Owen's expressions had changed, Jack did not dare to hesitate. Without thinking, he raised his hand to shoot a signal arrow into the sky, but at this moment, wait. Look over there. Sylvia's gaze suddenly turned. In the strange stone forest more than 1,000 feet away from the southern shore, she vaguely caught a glimpse of a familiar figure, which disappeared in a flash. What are you looking at? Jack and Selina turned their heads in confusion. He's here. Sylvia's lips curled up slightly, and she said with great certainty, he's here. In the stone forest on the southern shore, grass and trees flew everywhere. Kill you, kill you. I'm going to kill you with my own hands. Die. With a rumble, ancient trees flew backward, and gravel flew everywhere. Amidst the furious roar, a burly figure covered in dazzling fighting aura carried a domineering spear aura. Like a primordial beast, he passed through the stone forest, sweeping everything in his path. However, in front of him, too slow, too slow. You. Too slow. He sighed regretfully and mockingly. The figure that was being pursued by the domineering spear aura moved and dodged between the stone forest like a monkey that had just awakened its apertures. It looked like it was in imminent danger and would be completely smashed into pieces in the next second, but it always managed to safely dodge at the most critical moment. Forget it. You can't kill me. In fact, you can't even touch the corner of my clothes. Why bother? In a flash, he moved forward at high speed. That Pope is not your father, and the first prince is not your son. Just do your best. No one will blame you. Why do you have to chase after them? He was long-winded and tried his best to persuade her. I'm going to kill you. Just turn around and take a look. Really, the situation at the temple headquarters is really bad. You should hurry back to save people and organize a retreat. Die. The fighting aura was violent, and the spear shadows were everywhere. Why can't you reason with me? Look, you got stabbed again. Don't be so shameless. Do you want to force me to kill you? I'm going to kill you with my own hands. Alright, you win. Jumping close to the ground, he flashed through the gaps between the fallen giant trees. Then, he used his hands to support himself on the ground and flipped himself up. After a series of movements were completed smoothly, Tang En helplessly looked at the burly figure behind him who had directly knocked the giant tree trunk away. It was the retired head knight commander. He shook his head speechlessly. This old man seemed to have really gone crazy. How the hell was he going to escape so smoothly? That's right. The reason why Tang En was so long-winded to dissuade them was because he had the intention to retreat. Although he seemed to be deliberately provoking them before, leading a large group of temple pursuers to take a detour, he did not take the right path. In fact, he had seen all the movements of Jack and the others, and he knew that they had safely boarded the boat. Therefore, Tang En naturally did not have the mood to continue playing. But he did not want to play. Not only did the retired head knight commander not succeed in his pursuit, but he also got stabbed from time to time. He was so irritated that he had set his mind on Tang En. Even if his subordinates were far behind, he still did not want to give up. He would not stop until he killed Tang En. Whatever. Through the gaps between the trees in front of him, Tang En saw the little boat on the lake. He squinted his long narrow eyes and decisively turned around. He had made up his mind to kill. Since you want to die, then don't blame me. Of course, the retired head knight commander did not know that Tang En had changed his mind. Seeing Tang En's body slightly slow down, he did not hesitate to stab with his spear. With a whoosh, the spear was as fast as the wind. The tip of the spear instantly pierced through Tang En's left chest. No, it was an illusion. Although the head knight commander seemed to have lost his mind, he did not hesitate at all when he fought. After he realized that his spear did not hit its target, he pulled back his spear without thinking. He turned the stab into a sweep and swept across a large area around his body. In an instant, a whirlwind was created. The leaves on the ground were like sharp blades dancing in the air. It was a spectacular sight. This was the real reason why Tang En did not want to kill him. This old man was not an ordinary temple guard. He was a retired holy head knight commander. He had been fighting for his whole life. He had a lot of experience in killing people. He was not an ordinary person that could be taken down easily. He was very troublesome. Of course, Tang En's killing intent was not for nothing. His opponent's Do Chi realm was around the middle of Void Rank. With this kind of strength, even if he was at his peak, Tang En was confident that he could kill him. Old man, do you really think I'm scared of you? Open. With a bang, the flying dagger suddenly exploded in front of the head commander. A pitch-black dagger pierced through his body and went straight for his forehead. Haha, great! The retired head knight commander laughed out loud. He was not scared. Instead, he was happy. He was not afraid of Tang En's sharp counterattack. He was only scared that Tang En would run away. He had to admit, Tang En's speed was just too crazy. If he only wanted to run away, the retired head knight commander would not be able to do anything to him. Explode, explode, explode. This was a rare opportunity. The retired head knight commander had gone crazy. He did not even care about the dagger that was coming towards his forehead. Instead, he roared into the sky. The dazzling holy combat chi around him kept expanding and exploding. It was almost materialized. It was like layers of holy armor, mighty and domineering. This was purely using power to oppress others. Normally, people who were good with spears would not let their opponents get close to them. They would not be able to use their full power. However, this retired head knight commander did the exact opposite. He did not seem to care at all. This was also because he was used to it. He did not believe that the strength he had gained over half of his life would be weaker than a young kid. Die. Seeing this, Tang En's eyes flashed with murderous intent. He really wanted to see what kind of expression this retired head commander would have when he pierced through his combat chi armor and between his eyebrows with his blade. However, it was only a thought. Although Tang En was confident that he could kill this reckless old man with his blood chi dagger, at the same time, he would also be injured by the intermediate void combat chi. Although the result wouldn't be to the extent that he would be lying on the ground like a corpse, he would still be severely injured. And he was still in the temple's range. It was not worth it. With this thought in mind, Twain feinted with his dagger and leaped up. The tip of his foot tapped lightly, and he stepped on the body of the spear that was whistling toward him. Suddenly, there was an uproar as he soared into the sky, smashing the branches of the ancient trees above his head, and disappeared. "Ha ha, coward! Take my spear again if you can." Seeing Tang En running away without a fight, the retired head knight commander's heart calmed down. He squinted his eyes and looked up to see where Tang En was hiding. At the same time, he tried to provoke Tang En. However, before he could finish his sentence, his face suddenly changed. He subconsciously stepped forward and rushed forward like he was on fire. Despicable! With a poof, blood spurted out from his shoulder. He roared, "Shameless bastard, do you only know how to sneak attack? Haha, that's strange." Tang En flashed behind the head knight commander like a ghost and raised his blood-stained dagger. If the head knight commander did not run fast enough, that strike would have been enough to kill him. "I am an assassin. If I don't sneak attack, should I learn from you and fight head-on?" That was the logic. The retired head knight commander was speechless. He didn't know how to refute. In fact, he was unable to open his mouth to refute, because Twain, who had taken the initiative, was unforgiving. He was like a maggot in a tarsal bone, following left and right like a shadow. What came along with him was a storm of dagger shadows. Ding ding ding, slit throat, defend, stab eyebrows, retreat, eviscerate, gouge the back, stab the heart. In just 10 breaths, the battle had turned into a one-sided slaughter. There was no time to fight back, and there was no time to breathe. Under the sky full of dagger shadows, the retired head knight commander could no longer be seen. The only proof that he was still alive was the continuous roars of surprise and the occasional muffled groan of pain that could be heard from him. It was just that he was in a mess. It was very frustrating. At that moment, the head knight commander saw the blood spurting out from the seemingly invulnerable combat chi armor. He felt the wounds on his numb and trembling body. He finally understood why the head knight commander took the initiative to dodge. It was not because the head knight commander couldn't break through his combat chi defense, nor was it because the head knight commander was afraid of him. The head knight commander just didn't want to exchange injuries with him. Just like how no one would want to use a jade stone to collide with a tile, after understanding this, the high morale he had just now disappeared. What replaced it was a sense of disbelief and despair that could not be suppressed. In a battle between masters, the worst thing was to be distracted. After noticing the head knight commander's dispirited state, Tang En increased his attack speed again. His momentum was even more ferocious. Finally, with a slashing sound, the black dagger that was like a poisonous snake in the dark swept across the Damascus steel spear like the wind. With an ear-piercing sound, it drew a long trail of light in the dark forest. It was deadly and gorgeous. In an instant, it had arrived in front of the retired head knight commander. "Let go!" With a bang, the Do-Mang spear flew high into the air. The two figures separated. Immediately, one of the burly figures flew back in the air like a cannonball. He broke dozens of ancient trees in succession before heavily falling to the ground and vomiting blood incessantly. "I gave you a way out, but you didn't want to leave." In the darkness, Tang En stepped on the soft leaves and walked forward. He looked at the head knight commander, who was half kneeling and gasping for breath, with an indifferent expression. "Then I can only fulfill your wish." Again. Huff, huff. The evil bastard will not escape the judgment of the light. Come and fight me again. Come on. The head knight commander struggled to stand up with his bloody hands supporting the trunk of an ancient tree behind him. He madly screamed at Tang En. His face was twisted and terrifying. Shaking his head, Tang En did not want to waste any more time with this crazy old man. He held his dagger and stepped forward to end him. But at that moment, suddenly, rumble. There was a strange explosion and the ground shook. Tang En was caught off guard. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. After stabilizing his body, he subconsciously looked under his feet. His pupils suddenly shrank. On the ground, layers of fallen leaves were rustling like waves, undulating up and down irregularly. At some point in time, numerous fine cracks had appeared on the ground beneath the fallen leaf. Like a spiderweb, the cracks continued to radiate and spread with the increasing frequency of the tremors. Not good, this is too much. Even if you haven't eaten pork before, you have seen pigs run. Although in the modern world, Tang En had never experienced natural disasters like earthquakes and landslides, he still knew a little about them. The cracks that kept spreading in front of him were the most common cracks seen in earthquake. Fuck. I can't stay here anymore. In the face of natural disasters and man-made disasters, personal strength was absolutely not enough. Thinking of this, Tang En, whose scalp was numb, did not dare to hesitate. He stepped on the cracks in the ground and instantly ran at full speed. Want to leave? Stay. Just as he rushed a few steps, a black shadow suddenly pounced from the side and madly hugged Tang En's legs. It was the retired head knight who was covered in cuts and bruises. He knew very well what this abnormal situation meant. If there were no accidents, the Millennium Temple had reached its end. Such an irresistible trend could not be stopped by a single person's strength. There was nothing more sorrowful than a dead heart. His only thought now was to keep the culprit behind all this. Of course, the previous situation had already shown that he could not keep the other party by relying on his strength alone. So he thought of exchanging a life for a life. As long as he could hold on to Tang En, he would rather die than let go. It was a pity. Although this idea was not bad, how could he, who was seriously injured and on the verge of death, be able to hold on to Tang En's speed? Sure enough, with just a slight sidestep and without reducing his speed, Tang En swept past the bloody palms like the wind. During this time, he did not even look at him. Don't go. You can't go. Come back. Come back. The mournful cry of despair, with sorrow and sorrow, echoed for a long time. And the only response he got was a resolute figure that quickly disappeared into the bushes and trees. The next moment, the ancient trees fell and boulders were scattered. What a collapsing world. Chapter 11:14. The four shores of the lake were in an uproar. The statue of God fell? Why do I feel like, the entire island is shaking? Did my eyes deceive me? What's going on? After all, the lake was thousands of feet away, and the people who had followed the first prince to watch the ceremony naturally did not know what was happening on the island. However, although they could not see the various details and could not speculate the outcome, this did not mean that they were blind. At the very least, they'd seen the peerlessly overbearing and dazzling saber light that had appeared out of nowhere, and the sudden collapse of the white jade divine statue that towered into the clouds that supported the heavens and the earth. Just these two matters were enough to make the four shores of the lake go silent and fall into a deathly silence. Then, an ear-piercing scream of a noble lady came from somewhere, instantly breaking the silence. The scene was in an uproar, and an uncontrollable panic suddenly spread. Some covered their mouths, some covered their eyes, some hugged their heads, and some simply fainted. The nobles and commoners who came along could not believe what they were seeing, and discussed animatedly. At the same time, the temple guards who were maintaining order on the four shores of the lake roared in unison after a moment of absent-mindedness. Like hungry tigers descending the mountain, they quickly pounced on a certain mound by the lake. That was where the blade ray had originated from. However, when they rushed up and surrounded the mound, it was already empty, and there was not a trace of a person. Of course, there were still traces of space magic. However, before they could call for the mages to follow the clues to find the melon, another unforeseen event occurred. If the collapse of the statue of God of Light made the onlookers unable to believe their eyes, then now, the continuous and even more violent shaking of the island made the onlookers want to rub their eyes out. The bystanders were always more clear-headed than the people involved. Standing on the shore of the lake, whether they were willing to admit it or not at this time, even the most staunch clergy could see that the island was not in a good state, as if, it was going to collapse. In fact, it was exactly so. In just a short span of 10 minutes, the shore of the island that was hit by the surging waves suddenly shook and collapsed along with several loud rumbles. Dust and ashes filled the sky, startling countless birds in the forest and causing them to flee in fear. Then, huge rocks fell all over the ground and rolled down the slope into the surrounding waters, creating an uproar and even bigger splashes. Finally, under the countless horrified gazes of the people on the other side of the lake, the outer area of the island began to gradually collapse and collapse. The originally towering and precipitous precipice suddenly became shorter by a head, then shorter by another head. In the end, with a resolute and unstoppable momentum, it slid into the ice-cold lake and was submerged. Soon after, the ancient trees floated up like canoes, bobbing up and down with the waves. This was only the beginning. The collapse of the surrounding area was like the opening of Pandora's box. Then, the frequency of the shaking of the island became more and more rapid. One by one, the areas of the temple headquarters spread out and fell. At this point, whether it was the onlookers standing on the opposite shore or the people in the divine hall on the island, they could not help but have a bleak realization in their hearts. The divine hall headquarters that had stood tall on the continent for thousands of years would probably become history after today. Of course, it was only the temple headquarters that had become history, or rather, only this island. It did not represent the entirety of the Temple of Light. In fact, just as the statue collapsed and chaos was about to erupt, countless figures had already boarded the ships docked at the island's dock and left this troublesome place at the first moment. Among them, there were many who wore red robes and luxurious robes. This proved a principle that no matter which time and space it was, letting the leader go first was the norm. However, it was foreseeable that even if most of the clergy on the island managed to escape successfully, the Temple of Light would not be able to escape heavy losses. Because right in their territory, the Pope, the person with the greatest authority in the temple and the incarnation of God, had been assassinated. Even his corpse couldn't be preserved. Could there be anything more humiliating than this? In addition to the Temple of Light, the other victim of this incident, the Bran Palace, would undoubtedly usher in the throes of mourning. No one would have thought that the eldest prince, who killed his father and harmed his brother, who tried his best to catch a glimpse of the hope of the crown, would fall at the last step to the throne, and also die in the hands of Tang En. And the Bran Empire, which was in a precarious situation, could not help but fall into an awkward situation again. Of course, some were happy and some were sad. Some were sad, and naturally, some were happy. Some beat their chests and stomped their feet, and some pointed to the sky and cursed the earth. Naturally, there were people who congratulated each other and rushed to spread the news. As mentioned before, the coronation of the eldest prince was a major event that deserved attention. Then, after Tang En got involved and killed the traitorous disciple of the Sword God in the capital and threatened to assassinate the Pope, this muddy water was thoroughly stirred up, and the Temple of Light headquarters was sent to the teeth of the storm. Therefore, the current chaotic situation of the Temple of Light headquarters naturally could not be hidden from the eyes and ears of those who wanted to know. Almost half a day later, on the wall of a devastated town in the south of the Bran, the second prince, who was covered in blood and dirt and looked like a madman, was in a daze after listening to the report of the old noble in front of him, whose voice was trembling with excitement. He first took a deep breath, and then, under the gaze of many people on the wall, he suddenly raised his hand and threw the sword in his hand far away from the wall, raised his head and put his hands on his waist, and laughed heartily. "Ha ha! I knew it! Ha ha! I knew it would be like this! It was not in vain that I deliberately tried to curry favor with him along the way. Tang-en, oh Tang-en, this matter was well done! Ha ha! Brother, oh brother, you also have a day like this? You also have a day like this! Ha ha!" Looking at the second prince who was laughing so hard, the old noble who came to report could not help but be overjoyed, but he did not laugh along with him. This was not to say that the old noble was very good at keeping his composure, but because he had received the news first, he had already laughed and celebrated a few times, so naturally, he could barely suppress the ecstasy in his heart at this time. Moreover, the old noble also had a different thought in his heart, and that was his admiration for the second prince in front of him. He finally understood why the second prince did not listen to their advice and insisted on putting on his armor and going into battle himself, and even said that they did not know anything. They really did not know anything. It turned out that the reason the second prince did not retreat was not because he was afraid of being captured, but because he was waiting for the news of the assassin's success. Without a doubt, this was a huge gamble, and the chances of success were not high. Once it failed, only death would await them, including the second prince and the rest. Fortunately, it turned out that the second prince had succeeded. He had only placed a small bet on the assassin, and he had won a bountiful return that was comparable to the heavens. This business was done, wholeheartedly. Soon, when the second prince's laughter gradually stopped, the old noble quickly asked, "Your Highness, what should we do now? What should we do? Ha ha, what else do we need to do now?" After a pause, the second prince seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and he slapped his forehead. "There is indeed something to do. Let's go, quickly go and get my luxurious clothes. I want to take a bath and change my clothes, open the city gate, and accept the surrendered soldiers into the city to pay their respects and receive their punishment." Open the city gate? The old noble's expression suddenly changed, and the admiration in his heart was immediately put aside, and he quickly advised, "Your Highness, please be careful of their evil intentions." He simply waved his hand and interrupted, "Don't worry, they won't dare." The second prince raised his head proudly, and with a confident smile on his face, he said firmly, "Because now the new king of Bran is here." Half a day later, at dusk, the news finally crossed the Leno River and reached the high ground of the northern shore. The Pope of the Temple of Light was assassinated, and the new king of Bran who was about to ascend the throne was also killed. So, he succeeded? The person who reported the news was Bamatu. He also wanted to know the result of Tang-en, who had succeeded in a sneak attack under his nose, successfully captured Lan Sha, and escaped unscathed. So, as soon as he received the news, he became a messenger and came in person to deliver the news. Then, looking at the two women in front of him who had been sitting on the bench for a day, who were slightly tired and trying their best to remain calm and casual, but their tense bodies and palms tightly grasping the wooden armrests exposed their unusual nervousness at the moment. Bamatu couldn't help but chuckle, and nodded affirmatively. Yes, he should have succeeded. Pause for a while, he sighed with emotion. I remember when we set out, I reminded him to only focus on saving people and not to provoke the Pope, that annoying old man. But I didn't expect that he would directly kill the Pope. Oh, it seems that I'm really old. Bamatu did have a reason to sigh with emotion. Although he didn't know Tang-en for a long time, when he thought of the little guy who was shocked by his momentum in the library of the royal city, and then looked at what Tang-en had done and achieved today, it was no wonder that he couldn't help but sigh in admiration of his old age. But it was obvious that neither Josiah nor Lan Sha would care about the old man's sigh now. Since he succeeded, then he must be able to get away safely, right? Josiah unconsciously licked his lips and asked with a slightly dry voice. Looking at her and Lan Shah's nervous posture, anyone could tell what answer they wanted to hear. And Bamatu didn't have the intention to keep them in suspense. Of course, if he really chose to keep them in suspense at this time, he believed that the two women with frightening backgrounds in front of him wouldn't mind fighting him to the death. He nodded again. Don't worry, that kid is very crafty. Since he chose to make a move, he must have 100% confidence in getting away. Phew, they let out a long sigh of relief at the same time. Although it was only 2 questions, one for each person, after Bamata gave an affirmative answer, Josiah and Lan Shah both seemed to have run hundreds of miles with weights on their backs. They closed their eyes and leaned against the back of the wooden chair. Their hands and legs were weak, and their whole body was weak. They didn't even notice when Bamatu quietly left. After a moment, Lan Shah was the first to come back to his senses. He broke the silence. In the end, we still let him succeed. Pause for a while. He glanced at Sylvia, who was resting with her eyes closed. His eyes flashed, and then he laughed. Ha, he got the beauty back. Now that I think about it, his risky move is really worth it. Without a doubt, these words hit the heart. But thinking about it carefully, it was also appropriate. After all, since the external conflict had been resolved, then the internal conflict naturally had to be brought to the table again, and properly discussed. But regrettably, although Lan Shah's knife was sharp enough, Josiah's expression was extremely calm, as if he didn't understand the other party's deep meaning. He shook his head and said softly, "Whether it was worth it or not, I don't know. I only know that after this incident, I'm really scared, so." He turned his head to look at Lan Shah, who was in a daze, and said indifferently but firmly, "When he comes back, I will get married." Get married? With who? With him? Josiah said lightly, but when the words entered Lan Shah's ears, it was like a big bell. Her delicate body instantly trembled, and a series of questions blurted out. She couldn't stay calm anymore. Because, even if Lan Shah, who had been competing with the other party until now, was very clear that as long as the woman in front of him really proposed marriage, that person would definitely not refuse. At that time, how could she compete? Compete for what? But after all, Lan Shah was Lan Shah. After taking a deep breath and stabilizing her emotions, she immediately thought that the other party wanted to see her make a fool of herself, so deliberately said this. How treacherous! She narrowed her beautiful thin eyes and shrugged as if she didn't care and said with a smile, "Oh? Is that so? Then I really have to congratulate you. But I'm afraid that you have the intention, but that person has no intention. After all, he's really busy now. Well, counting the time, that delicate flower of nights should be about to give birth. Injuring the enemy 1,000 times, but losing 800 times. This was the close combat after shedding all pretense of cordiality. However, Josiah was still calm, and even shrugged his shoulders like Lan Shah. It doesn't matter anyway, we're going to get married. Of course, saying that it didn't matter was a lie. In front of love, even saints had to be selfish. However, in order to see the more tangled and depressed appearance of the rival in front of her, Josiah naturally wouldn't refuse to do a deal that harmed others without benefiting herself. In fact, she did succeed. Lan Shah heard the words, and the corner of her eyes instantly twitched. After a moment, she let out a long breath, put on a somewhat stiff smile again, and continued to stab the knife. It really doesn't matter? Then I admire you sincerely. At the very least, I can't bear to watch my fiancé get involved with 2 or even more women before I get married. Oh yes, there's also an illegitimate child that's about to be born. Josiah spread out her hands. That's why I'm not you, I'm very weak, I only want to get married. Just like how a retracted fist hurts more when you hit someone, the lower your posture, the better the feeling of being slapped in the face. You are too anxious. You should think about it again, really, think about it, the Grey Coat Army situation has just been settled, the location of the capital is still undecided, there are many, many things to do. As the leader, you don't think about solving these important matters, but only care about your own personal matters. This will be gossiped by your subordinates. I want to get married. Also, getting married is not a small matter. According to the customs of the Bran, at least let your parents see what the person marrying their daughter looks like. I want to get married. You a huff? Is this interesting? Just to piss me off? Are you willing? Do you have any shame? Sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. I want to get married. Finally, with a bang, the wooden chair flew out. Lan Shah got up in exasperation, flicked his sleeves and left. You woman, unreasonable! Chapter 11:15. Perhaps some of the cliché logic sounded a little pessimistic and realistic, but countless examples had already proven that it was indeed the truth. For example, no matter how honorable your position was, how much wealth you had, how much power you had, how much you were worshipped in the eyes of the world, how much you were unreachable, when your physical body was obliterated, which was also known as death in the common sense, all of these would naturally fade away with the wind, and be mercilessly replaced by those who came after you. At most, your grave would be built a little more magnificent than others. This was the truth. To put it bluntly, the world would function normally without anyone. Hence, dang, the noise died down. Dust returned to the earth. A month later, North Shanghai City. Morning, an unassuming inn in a certain street. With a loud bang, the wooden door was pushed open heavily. A hearty laugh came in before a burly figure covered in dust. "Haha, old Tom, thank me. I'm here to take care of your business again. Give me a cup of barley wine. If you add water, I'll smash your signboard." "Damn it, my door!" Roaring angrily, a figure that was even more burly than the former, or to be more precise, bloated, stretched out of the counter and looked at the door. He was stunned. "Reuben? It's you. Didn't you say that the situation was chaotic and that you wouldn't come out to do business for a year?" The burly man with a bag on his back and dressed like a merchant helplessly shrugged. "I have no choice, you know that my family depends on me. If I don't come out, who will? Okay, stop talking nonsense, give me a cup of barley wine, I ate so much sand along the way." One could see that this merchant known as Reuben was really familiar with the owner of the inn. He was not courteous at all, smashing the counter as a greeting. "All right, wait a moment. 3 silver coins." "What?" The burly man who was about to throw out a silver coin widened his eyes when he heard the tavern owner's words. He looked at the fat tavern owner with a "are you kidding me?" expression. "Old Tom, are you joking with me? 3 silver for a cup of barley wine? Damn it, you're robbing me. Wasn't it a silver in the past?" "Like you said, that was in the past." On the other hand, the tavern owner was quite calm. "Now that food is scarce, there's a limited supply. Don't even think about using it to brew wine. Since you're an acquaintance, I'm only charging you 3 silver coins. The starting price at other places is at least 5 silver coins." The burly man was taken aback when he heard this. He seemed to have thought of something, and his expression eased. After hesitating for a moment, he reluctantly took out 2 more silver coins and grumbled, all right, this damned world, be content." The seemingly fat tavern owner quickly stretched out his chubby hand and put away the 3 silver coins. "This situation is only temporary. The price will soon drop. And if the world is really bad, you wouldn't have the guts to come out, would you?" You're right." The burly man scratched his head. Then, when the fat owner turned around to get the wine, he habitually turned his head and roughly glanced at the tavern hall. It wasn't very lively, and the morning was never the peak time for businesses like taverns. In the spacious tavern hall, there were only 2 tables of people. One table was in the corner, and there were a few men and a woman. It could be seen that the woman wearing a wide hat was the leader. She ate and drank very quietly and kept a low profile. From these people, the burly man smelled the scent of his peers. If he guessed correctly, these people should also be running a business, but the scale was definitely much larger than him. They might be a small business group or something. As for the other table, there were a few young and strong men. They clinked their bowls and loudly urged people to drink. It was very noisy, but this was the normal atmosphere of the tavern. As he was sizing them up, the wooden counter in front of him suddenly knocked twice. "All right, here's your barley wine." "Thanks, old Tom. I only want 1 cup." The burly man turned around and looked at the 2 cups of barley wine on the counter. He couldn't help but be stunned. "I know, the other cup is mine." Opening the small door beside the counter, the fat owner moved out with difficulty. He picked up the wine cup and waved, "Let's go. It's rare to meet an acquaintance like you. I'll drink with you and get to know my new friend." Friend? The tavern had never been a peaceful place. After a few cups of horse urine, fights were common. As a result, those who dared to open taverns naturally had a wide range of social connections. It was necessary to make a few more friends when they had nothing to do. Who knew when they would come in handy? However, although he knew the inside of the tavern, the burly man still hesitated when he heard this. Because of the 2 groups of people in the hall, the only ones who could become friends with the owner were those few young and strong men. And this was the reason why the burly man hesitated. For someone like him who was running a business, he had to meet all kinds of people every day. Naturally, his vision was different. For example, these young and strong men in front of him, although they were not wearing any armor and did not have any blades around their waists, but judging from their iron-blooded killing intent, he knew that they must have killed people before. They should be soldiers or law enforcers in the city. Regardless of the former or the latter, with the burly man's experience in running a business, he knew that they were difficult characters that he couldn't provoke. "Why don't we forget about it, old Tom? I'm not familiar with them after all. Let's find a place to drink by ourselves." Without waiting for the burly man to decline, the fat owner laughed and shook his head. "Haha, don't worry, Reuben. I know what you're worried about. But it's really different now. This is the territory of the Gray Coat Army." Pointing at his feet, pause for a while, he put his arm around the burly man's shoulder. "I won't hide it from you. They are the Gray Coat Army. But they used to be soldiers. Now, they play a role similar to the garrison cavalry, protecting the security of the city. They do things by the rules. You'll know once you get to know them. Besides, even if you don't trust them, don't you trust me?" All right then." The burly man naturally didn't have any reason to refuse. He held his wine cup and followed behind the fat owner, walking nervously to the table of the young and strong men. "Andy, Colin, and these 2 little brothers. How's my wine? Are you satisfied with it?" "Yo, old Tom, you've taken our money and even come to our door to ask us to praise you." "Haha, to be honest, old Tom, your winemaking skills are superb. It's spicy enough. Not bad, not bad. Right, if we say we're not satisfied, you won't refuse to let us in next time, right?" "Haha, that's not possible." It could be seen that the fat shop owner was indeed familiar with these soldiers in the Gray Coat Army. He called out the names of 2 of them and even put his chubby hand on the shoulder of a soldier in his prime. He greeted them enthusiastically. "Let me introduce you. This is Reuben, a merchant. He's a friend of mine, old Tom. If you need to bring any goods or send a letter to your family, as long as you're on his business route, it won't be a problem." "Haha, that's right. Reuben greets you, my lords." The fat owner could be presumptuous, but the burly man naturally didn't dare. He braced himself and stepped forward with a smile. He raised his glass and said, "It's the first time we've met, my lords. Let me treat you all to a drink. I'll pay for the drinks." His attitude was respectful and courteous, but in reality, he was treating them to a meal. The burly man felt that his response was quite appropriate. However, just as he finished speaking, the warm atmosphere suddenly froze. The two young gray coat army soldiers' faces even changed. What's going on? Did I say something wrong? The burly man's heart pounded when he saw this. He immediately looked at the fat owner for help. The latter smiled bitterly and patted the burly man's shoulder. It's okay. You just arrived and don't understand the situation. It's not your fault. These words were obviously meant to comfort the burly man, but in reality, it was an explanation for the gray coat army soldiers. Sure enough, when they heard this, their expressions immediately eased up a lot. The leading soldier named Andy raised his wine cup and nodded to the burly man with a smile. I don't dare to call you sir. We appreciate your kindness, brother. We can drink, but we'll pay for the drinks ourselves. Otherwise, if we're caught by the monitoring team, we'll be punished again. Monitoring team. A monitoring organization for the Gray Coat Army to restrain their own people, the fat owner explained briefly. The fat shop owner explained briefly, and then patted the burly man's shoulder again. He sighed and said, I just told you. It's really different here now. But it's just a glass of wine. The burly man seemed to understand. He scratched his head and couldn't help but be speechless. It's just a glass of wine now, but if we accept it, it might be different in the future. Andy shrugged. The leader said that it's called taking precautions. Then I'll propose a toast to my lords. Big brother. Half a glass will do. Haha, the price of wine isn't cheap now. Let's share it and have a taste. Now that they were talking, the atmosphere eased up. The few gray coat army soldiers and the fat owner were obviously used to this and didn't find it strange. Only the burly man was still in disbelief. Everything he saw and heard before him was undoubtedly very different from his previous experience as a merchant. In fact, it was the complete opposite. However, this was still a good thing. If it wasn't necessary, no one would want to bow and scrape and bribe people everywhere, right? Soon, after drinking a few mouthfuls of wine, the burly man, who gradually became more courageous, sighed with emotion. Half fawning and half sincere, he said, No wonder my journey here is much more peaceful than before. There are not many bandits who rob people on the way and ask for money. This is also the work of your gray coat army, right? To be precise, we just started doing it. A young gray coat army soldier took over the conversation with a slight sense of pride. You know, there have always been many bandits in the north, and there's never enough to wipe them out. However, most of the bandits are just civilians who take risks because they don't have enough to eat. Now that the north has been taken over by our gray coat army, there's no exploitation. As long as you're willing to work hard, you'll always be able to get food to eat. Because of this, the number of bandits has naturally decreased greatly. As for the real bandits, their good days are coming to an end. We're just about to start taking care of them. Shut up. Hearing this, the leading soldier named Andy suddenly frowned and interrupted rudely. You're drunk. How can you comment on military matters so casually? The young soldier couldn't help but tremble when he heard this. He knew that he had said too much and quickly lowered his head without saying anything. Haha, it's fine. Reuben and I aren't talkative people. Drink, everyone drink. The fat owner tried to smooth things over while winking at the burly man. The latter nodded and quickly changed the topic. Oh right, when I first entered the city today, I noticed that the city gate was heavily guarded. I was a little nervous. Why is that? I was just asking. If it's not convenient for you to say, then forget it. Oh, about that. Well, it's considered a big matter for our gray coat army. But there's no harm in talking about it. Andy pondered for a moment before replying, It's our leader's wedding today, so the checks are a little stricter. Leader's wedding? Who? Leader Josiah? The fat owner couldn't help but exclaim when he heard this. It was obvious that he didn't know about this either. He then looked at Andy and nodded gently. He was stunned again. This is such a big matter. Why isn't there any movement in the city at all? The leader has emphasized that he only wants to have a simple wedding, so there's no need to spread the news. In fact, not many people were invited. As far as I know, some of the higher-ups weren't invited either. I see. Leader Josiah is too. The fat owner didn't say anything. The fat shop owner sighed with emotion for a long time. In the end, he didn't say it clearly. However, the burly man naturally understood the meaning behind it. Not to mention that the leader of the Grey Coat Army now had a supreme status that was equivalent to splitting the land and conferring the title of king. Just talking about those rich and famous people that he had seen in the past, or those small nobles that couldn't be shown in public, they would play gongs and drums when they held their weddings. Was it really different in the silence? The fat owner was lost in thought. He sighed again and said, 10 days ago, I was fortunate enough to see our leader's heroic appearance. She was beautiful and generous, but I only dared to look at her from afar. Sigh, I wonder which family's son is so lucky to marry her. A few Grey Coat Army soldiers at the side nodded subconsciously when they heard this, especially the 2 young soldiers. They looked envious and bitter. They gulped down 2 mouthfuls of wine. For a moment, they felt a chill in the depths of their hearts. The small thoughts that they didn't dare to tell others were instantly washed away. Captain, don't you always brag that you're a veteran from the City of Dawn? Then do you know who our leader's husband is? After putting down the wine glass, a young soldier couldn't suppress the thoughts in his heart. Perhaps he wanted to make himself give up completely, so he took advantage of the alcohol to ask this question. Yes, Captain, tell us. Another young soldier couldn't wait to persuade him. Only the fat owner and the burly man were dumbfounded when they heard this. This was too low-key. Did the Grey Coat Army soldiers not know who their leader's husband was? Don't ask me. I've only heard some rumors in the past. I'm not sure. Unable to withstand the incessant persuasion of his subordinates, the leading soldier called Andy thought for a while and reluctantly replied, Don't force me. If it's really that man. He paused and seemed to have thought of something. A few traces of imperceptible fear appeared in his eyes. He shook his head and said, I can't say. Sigh, Captain, you're too dishonest. You're only telling us half the story. That's right. You're keeping us in suspense. Let's drink. Let's drink. Seeing that Captain Andy refused to say anything, no matter how curious everyone was, they had no choice but to give up. Instead, they put their resentment into persuading him to drink. The hall was bustling with noise. Just as they were persuading him to drink, a few men and a woman from a small business group at a table in the corner had finished eating and drinking. They stood up quietly and quietly walked towards the door. Along the way, only the fat owner turned his head and saw them. He smiled and greeted them, Come again next time. A middle-aged man from the former politely turned around to return the greeting and then walked out of the shop. Mississippi, as soon as he left the area of the pub, the middle-aged man took a few steps forward and took the initiative to distance himself from the guards behind him. He came to the side of the woman wearing a wide hat that covered her face. He hesitated and asked, Miss, are you here to attend the wedding of the leader of the Grey Coat Army, Josiah? The woman stopped in her tracks and raised her eyebrows in surprise. Uncle Luo, you still remember Josiah? Of course. The middle-aged man nodded. If it's that genius sorceress from Lion City, she was your best playmate when you were young. Of course I remember her. Pause for a while frowned in confusion. I just don't understand. Since you have such a relationship, why haven't you visited her these past few days? Because it's different. The woman shrugged and spread her hands. In the vast territory of the north, her current status is slightly higher than the second prince of the empire, who was hastily crowned in the south a few days ago. What about me? I'm just a young lady from a declining noble family. The difference in status is huge. She shook her head lightly. If I visit her in a hurry and she doesn't recognize me, that scene, just thinking about it makes me feel awkward. Is that so? What else? As they spoke, the two of them walked to an ordinary horse carriage parked by the side of the road. The woman waved her hand carelessly. All right, Uncle Luo, don't think too much. Wait for me to adjust my mentality and I'll visit her to curry favor. After all, family business is more important. She blinked her eyes playfully and then turned around and walked into the carriage. The curtain of the carriage was lowered and her eyes drooped slightly. Her relaxed expression also disappeared. After a moment of silence, she picked up the teacup and a faint sigh slowly echoed in the carriage. Marriage. I'm sorry, my best playmate when I was young. I didn't mean to disturb your happiness, but there are some debts that should be repaid. Chapter 11:16. Victor's mood had been a little gloomy recently, because of Joshua's marriage. Don't get me wrong. As the chief bodyguard of the leader of the Grey Coat Army, he was almost middle-aged. He had a wife and a daughter, and his family was harmonious and happy. Naturally, he wouldn't be like those young people who had fantasies about Josiah that shouldn't exist. Moreover, because of his identity and profession, he knew a lot about Josiah. He knew very well how terrifying the man who had won the heart of a beauty was. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if he dared to steal that man's woman, even if he had 9 lives, it wouldn't be enough. The real reason why Victor was upset was because the news of the marriage came too suddenly, too hastily, and too casually. He remembered very clearly that it was a month ago when he left the north bank of the Llano River with the leader Josiah. When they walked out of the Northern Wilderness Army's camp, the somewhat silent Josiah suddenly asked him casually, "When is the best day of your life?" Victor remembered that he was a little confused when he heard that, but after thinking about it, he answered honestly, "A month from today, it's a good day." Then, the wedding date was set just like that. He was responsible for the overall planning of the wedding. At that time, Victor's shock and astonishment could no longer be described with words. It should be known that at that time, Josiah's status was enough to be on the same level as the king of the Bran and the Northern Wilderness Empress. The significance of such a person's wedding was obvious. Fortunately, Victor had seen big events before. It was his duty to serve the direct leader Josiah. Therefore, not long after he came back, he collected countless relevant information through various channels and gathered professionals in the field again and again to discuss, debate, and overthrow. In the end, he carefully selected a few wedding plans and confidently put them in front of Josiah. Then, there was no then. Josiah was stunned for a while and directly rejected all of the plans. Then, she apologized to him, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, and made a request. She wanted to do it more concisely. Although Victor was a little upset that his hard work was not recognized, Josiah's request made him feel relieved. As long as the leaders set the tone, everything would be easy to handle. With this thought in mind, Victor once again confidently organized the relevant personnel to discuss and debate. Soon, he came up with a few simple and stylish plans. This time, Josiah didn't kill them all, but he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He simply asked him, "How do ordinary people hold weddings?" When Victor heard this, he finally understood how concise Josiah was talking about. Victor denied such a whimsical idea without hesitation. This didn't mean that Victor wanted to be extravagant and wasteful. In fact, he was thinking about Josiah. The latter was now the ruler of a country and the first empress who created the world. Under the influence of such a legendary aura, some things were no longer up to Josiah to decide. Let's not talk about anything else, just this wedding. It was something that had to be recorded in history and passed down generation after generation for future generations to study and praise. If they followed Josiah's wishes, when future generations looked at this period of history and realized that the scale of the wedding of the legendary Empress Josiah was not even comparable to that of a rich man from the countryside. How could they accept that? Hence, he spoke with emotions, moved with reason, argued with justice. Victor's spittle flew everywhere while Josiah kept nodding his head. Just when Victor thought that he had finally convinced Josiah and dispelled his unreliable thoughts, Josiah suddenly blinked and asked, "Then if it was just to treat 2 tables of people to a meal, wouldn't it be simpler?" Changing the concept. This was cheating. In the front courtyard of the Shanghai City Lord's manor, Victor looked at the wedding that he had personally planned and arranged. The wooden table and chairs that only a few people had moved over, and there wasn't even a red carpet. He couldn't help but sigh and feel resentful. Just at this moment, "Yo, leader. Leader, you are here. Happy wedding, leader." Amongst the laughter and blessings, Victor turned around and saw Josiah, who was wearing a white robe, smiling as he walked in from the outer courtyard. He nodded his head in return and seemed to be in a good mood. Victor's face instantly turned black as he walked over and waved his hands to disperse them. "What are you all gathered here for? Don't you all have anything to do? You go to the kitchen. You go guard outside. Stay alert. If anything goes wrong today, I will hold you responsible." Hee, Victor, don't be nervous. It's just a wedding, it's not a big deal. Looking at Victor's black face and the surrounding people who had scattered like birds and beasts, Josiah didn't have the self-awareness of being the party involved at all. He helplessly waved his hands and shook his head as he tried to persuade Victor. It would have been better if she didn't say anything, but the moment she did, Victor was instantly furious. "How could it be like this? What do you mean by, it's just a wedding? What do you mean by, it's not a big deal?" Victor could only feel endless sadness for himself. He felt like the emperor wasn't worried, but the eunuch was worried to death. He took in a deep breath and slowly exhaled. "Leader, you should go and change your clothes. Let's not talk about the wedding. I can't win against you in an argument. But no matter how simple it is, you still have to wear a wedding dress, right?" "Yes, I will wear it now." Knowing that this middle-aged man in front of him was at his limit, Josiah immediately nodded his head. As he spoke, he was about to leave. "Did you send someone to invite old Marshal Omeng? His body isn't good, so remember to use my carriage when you go invite him." "Okay. Oh right, leader." Victor suddenly thought of something and called out, "Elder Mai just sent someone to tell me that he wants to attend the wedding. Do you think we should add another seat?" "Elder Mai?" Josiah was stunned, and then he couldn't help but frown slightly. Just like what the veteran in the tavern said, this wedding was really low-key to the extreme. Tang Yin's few brothers and friends, as well as Josiah's elders and family, added up to only about 20 people, and there would be 2 tables to sit. The higher-ups like Elder Mai had already informed them beforehand that they wouldn't be invited, and there were no seats at all. He hesitated and shook his head. "It's not good to add another seat, otherwise it'll be hard to explain to others. Elder Mai probably wants to come to plead for his grandson who injured people in the city a few days ago. Then we'll go back, no need to invite him." Hearing this, Josiah's frown deepened, and he didn't hesitate anymore. He waved his hand and refused directly. He reprimanded unhappily, "If such things happen again in the future, stop them for me. We're the Grey Coat Army, not the Rotten Bran Empire. Even if it will become rotten in the future, it can't be in my hands." "Yes." Victor's expression froze when he heard this, and he solemnly accepted the order. He waved his hand. "Okay, I'll go look for Tang Yin. You do your thing, it's been hard on you." In the backyard of the Castellan's mansion, when Josiah came looking for him, Tang Yin, who was dressed in formal attire, was explaining something to Harry in the courtyard. When he looked up and saw Josiah walking in with a smile, he immediately paused, waved his hand perfunctorily, and concluded, "That's all for now, keep an eye on him." "Okay, boss." Harry nodded and then turned around. When he saw Josiah, he immediately put on a fawning smile. Greetings, sister-in-law. Today is a happy day. Harry wishes you 200 years of marriage, and give us a little boss as soon as possible. Haha. Little boss. Josiah chuckled meaningfully. Isn't it already? No, oh, it's a girl over there. Cough cough. As soon as he said this, Harry started sweating. F***ck, I'm done for, this mouth of mine. That's right, after escaping from the temple headquarters, Sylvia successfully gave birth to a girl, and both mother and daughter were safe. This kind of happy event was naturally worth celebrating, but even Tang En, who was a first-time father and overjoyed, didn't dare to show it in front of Josiah. When he accidentally mentioned it, he quickly changed the topic. But he didn't expect that on this special day, Harry would let it slip. Looking at Josiah, whose expression instantly darkened when he heard this, Tang En put his hand on his forehead. He couldn't wait to strangle Harry, this unlucky child, to death immediately. The latter undoubtedly felt the resentment and murderous intent, so he didn't dare to raise his head. He randomly said that he still had something to do and fled in embarrassment. So it's a girl, do you have a name? In just a short breath, Josiah adjusted his expression and approached Tang En as if he didn't care. By the way, you just said to keep an eye on him. Keep an eye on what? Could it be that she's not in good health after giving birth? Oh, it's okay, if you're in a hurry, you can go and take a look, I don't mind. He spread his hands, showing great generosity. However, haha, if I believe you, I'll have lived my life in vain. Tang En touched his nose and smiled bitterly. You misunderstood, it's not her. It's not her? Josiah suddenly clapped his hands as if he really understood. I just heard that for some reason, since this morning, that person has been at the front line, personally leading hundreds of thousands of tribal troops to attack the Lano River waterway checkpoint in Bran. It's as if she's crazy, and she hasn't stopped for a moment. Are you concerned about her? Tang En's bitter smile was a little stiff, and he subconsciously raised his hand to touch his temples. Well, let's talk about the topic just now. The topic just now? Josiah raised his eyebrows. The one who just gave birth? Phew! You really misunderstood. The person I asked Harry to keep an eye on is not her. Letting out a long breath, Tang En felt like he was about to cry, so he quickly explained, it's our old acquaintance, and she's also your best friend. Best friend? Mine? Josiah pointed at himself in confusion, his face full of confusion. Tang En nodded. Yes, she's from Lion City. Haha, I haven't heard of this place for a long time. Thinking about that time, knowing you there, it's really quite nostalgic. Lion City. Best friend. Josiah muttered to himself for a while, then his eyes suddenly lit up. Betsy. It's Betsy, right? Facing the surprised gaze, Tang En smiled and nodded again. It's really her. Haha, she's here too. When did she come? Why didn't she come to find me? She came a few days ago, and she's been staying in Shanghai City. Tang En smiled and spread his hands. She probably wanted to find a suitable time to give us her blessings. Really? Where is she now? I'll go find. Pause for a while. Looking up at Tang En's faint smile, Josiah's voice gradually lowered, and he blinked inexplicably. Not many people were idiots, at least Josiah wasn't one. After the initial surprise, some memories of the past surged up. I remember. Betsy's brother, Bevan, died in your hands, you remember? You have a good memory. Tang En shrugged. But to be more precise, it's my two brothers and Bess. Although he committed suicide, I was indeed holding the hilt in my hands at that time. Then Betsy came this time. Looking at Tang and spreading his hands helplessly, Josiah's expression suddenly changed, and he hurriedly said, But there was a reason at that time. It was obviously Bevan who wanted to harm you first, and hurt your friend, so you counterattacked and killed him. No, I have to find that silly girl now, and stop her from doing anything stupid. Ah, don't always judge people with old eyes, she's not stupid now. Pulling back Josiah, who was about to turn and leave, Tang En smiled and shook his head to comfort him. I only found out after receiving the information, she's not some spoiled noble lady now, but a strong businesswoman who's the pillar of her family, with a bright future. And, take this matter as an example. I just said that she's been in Shanghai City for a few days. Do you know what she's been doing during this time? She's setting up. First, she heard about our marriage, then she decided to take action. The first person she contacted was Obi, who is your second uncle's younger brother. She pretended to meet him in a foreign land, and then used that as an excuse to get Obi to bring her into the city lord's manor, the place where we got married, and familiarize herself with the terrain. Why? Obi never mentioned this to me? Josiah frowned, thinking about something, and his expression gradually turned ugly. Tang En was slightly stunned, and then he couldn't help but laugh, raising his hand to smooth out the wrinkles between his brows. It's not as serious as you think. Obi didn't have any intention of colluding with outsiders to harm me. In reality, it's just an excuse. For Betsy, who's traveled extensively, it's too easy to fool Obi. For example, she said that she wanted to give you a surprise, so she asked Obi to keep it a secret. Isn't that easy? No wonder he stuttered when talking to me a few days ago. I thought he did something wrong and didn't dare to let me know. This stupid kid. Josiah recalled the relevant memories, and he couldn't help but feel angry and amused at the same time. Ha, it's a good thing that my brother-in-law is stupid, cough cough, back to the topic. Using Obi, this stupid kid, Betsy went in and out of the city lord's manor a few times, and she basically knew the situation here like the back of her hand. After collecting intelligence and familiarizing herself with the terrain, the next step was to choose the right time and method to take action. Needless to say, it's definitely going to be today. And, seeing my enemy fall when he's at his proudest. That scene, just thinking about it makes me feel good. Closing his eyes, he slightly opened his arms and breathed in the fantasy. In Josiah's eyes, Tang En's actions and expressions were a little excited and a little perverted. Is this an occupational disease? I really didn't expect that the big-breasted, brainless bitch from before would have the talent to be my peer. You can't judge a book by its cover. He shook his head with emotion. As for the choice of assassination method, I guess it's poisoning. And, if it's successful, there's also the possibility of a dozen more stabs to take revenge. How do you infer? In fact, what Josiah wanted to ask Tang En more was, seeing how calm and natural you are you sure you know that the person who might be stabbed more than a dozen times is yourself? It's a very simple inference. I'm not boasting, but with my infamous battle record and reputation, other than poisoning, she should know that there's no hope for her to succeed. And what's worth noting and admiring is that all the above actions were done by her alone, without any helpers. And she's probably worried that she won't get approval, so she didn't even trust the family guards that she brought with her. In this way, she, who's weak and wants to take revenge, is only left with the path of poisoning. But, pause for a while, he shook his head. Although there's no possibility of internal strife being exposed if she acts alone, she's been exposed to the public many times, so naturally, she's noticed by Skinny Monkey and the others. That's why she was discovered. So, a professional is a professional, and a half-baked one is a half-baked one. The difference is obvious, so you have to be careful. Chapter 11:17. How are you going to solve this matter? To be honest, Betsy, who had been holding back her killing intent until now, was still acting in secret. It could be said that even if he ordered Shou Ho and the others to catch her, they might not be able to find any evidence from her. In fact, Betsy was just checking out the situation now. The most outrageous thing she did was to enter and leave the city lord's mansion without permission. In other words, the above words were just one-sided guesses. Under normal circumstances, they could not be brought up to the table. But for now it was enough to be used on Tang En. At the right time, Tang En's reputation as an assassin would really shake the continent, just as he had mocked himself earlier, especially in the battle at the temple headquarters a month ago, after killing the Pope and the first Prince of Bran in a frenzy. He was even more in the limelight and notorious. He was not second to none when it came to assassination. Therefore, when the baseless guesses entered Josiah's ears, even if they were true, there was no doubt in his mind at all. He directly skipped asking how to solve the problem. After thinking about it, Tang En replied, "I'm going to watch from the sidelines." He was stunned. She's coming to kill you." "I know, let her kill me. Don't get too excited, you know I've been waiting for this opportunity for a long time." Pushing away the hand of grinning, Josiah stared at the relaxed Tang En and said with a frown, "I don't understand." Tang En smiled and spread his hands. "Then let me put it in another way. Do you think the Grey Coat Army still needs me now? Or what else can I do for you?" Josiah was stunned when he heard this and instantly understood. "I know you've always wanted to retire, but this and Betsy, you want to fake your death to get away?" "Ha, smart, you're indeed my wife." Tapping Josiah's straight nose, Tang En raised his head and laughed proudly. Then, he took a deep breath and narrowed his eyes as he looked into the distance. "I know that you have been secretly trying to clear my name and make the Grey Coat Army accept my existence again. I know that the effect isn't good, and there's a lot of resistance, especially from the higher-ups. This wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Could have been grand, but because of me, you chose this simple and even shabby wedding. Other than Fei Rui and Fry, you didn't invite anyone else. I'm sorry. The sudden confession and apology clearly caught Josiah off guard. He turned his head to the side in a slight panic. "I still don't understand." "Haha, you understand, but you don't want to say it." Tang En reached out and brushed away the strands of hair floating in front of Josiah's eyes and gently tucked them behind her ear. "Including the matter of clearing my name. Actually, you know very well that nowadays people's minds have changed. It's basically impossible to clear my name. Why don't you just let me retire? This way the higher-ups can completely relax and be under your control. I'll make them nod their heads. Even if they don't want to, they have to." Josiah clenched his fists and replied stubbornly, showing his dominance. Of course, she had the right to be so domineering now. But Tang En shook his head when he heard this. "Forget it, it's better to just cut off their heads. Haha, they're afraid of me. As long as I'm standing behind you, they won't be able to sleep peacefully." That was the truth. If it was said that most of the higher-ups of the Grey Coat Army previously ostracized Tang En because of the former leader, Rosa. But now, they were openly and secretly complying with Josiah's intention to clear Tang En's name. They didn't want Tang En to have the chance to stand in the limelight. There was no other reason but because Tang En's fierce reputation was too widespread. It could be said that he was the most terrifying weapon in Josiah's hands. The current Grey Coat Army was no longer the motley crew of the past. Instead, it was a huge country that was slowly rising. To put it bluntly, everyone fought with their lives against the noble class and the Bran Empire for so many years. Wasn't it just so that they could enjoy the rich fruits now, be crowned as kings and generals, be glorious and rich, and bring glory to their ancestors? Of course, not all of the higher-ups of the Grey Coat Army thought this way. There were also some who were more aware. But don't forget that most of the higher-ups were still from poor backgrounds. Don't get me wrong, Tang En didn't have any contempt for them. However, the reality was that the lack of education and culture had severely limited their horizons. Most of the higher-ups could not see so far ahead. Their values were actually not much different from the bandits and robbers who drank big bowls of wine and divided the gold and silver with a big bowl after making a deal without any capital. This was the limitation of the civilian uprising. Didn't it feel familiar? That's right, when Tang En was still in the modern world, he often saw this sentence in history books, and he often saw such examples. After coming to the other world, Tang En saw the real version. After the City of Dawn was destroyed, the defeated Grey Coat army could only flee to the depths of the 100,000 mountains. Hundreds of thousands of people lived like savages in the mountains, and they were extremely poor. At that time, there were also higher-ups of the Grey Coat army who fled with boxes full of gold and silver. They also intended to overturn Rose's last wish. They took advantage of the fact that Josiah had just taken the throne and his foundation was not stable. They wanted to overthrow her and replace her. Even when they were in trouble, they didn't forget to seize benefits for themselves, let alone now when the country was already under control. The delicacies were already on the table. Everyone knew that the first to act would get it, and the second to act would get nothing. Many of the higher-ups wanted to help, but they didn't dare to do so because they knew the existence of Tang En, the god of slaughter. If they provoked Josiah, based on their previous life-and-death friendship, they felt that Josiah would show them some mercy. At least, he wouldn't be ruthless. But if they provoked Tang En, the infamous god of slaughter, it was really unimaginable. Therefore, they naturally didn't want to see Tang En succeed in clearing his name and hanging a fatal sword over his head for no reason. This was a hidden game. It was also the first difficult problem Josiah faced after becoming the legendary queen. Without a doubt, Tang En wanted to help her. Don't think too much. Even if they don't come out to stop me, I will still retreat. In other words, if I don't want to retreat, then no one in the world can decide whether I stay or leave. I'm tired. It's the same whether I leave early or late. Now that I can use Betsy's matter to retreat, it saves me the trouble of finding another excuse. Also, pause for a while. Tang En narrowed his long and narrow eyes. Even if I suddenly disappear, who can be sure that I'm really dead? This was the real purpose of Tang En's retirement, which was to let the higher-ups feel that the shackles had been removed and that they were completely under Josiah's control. At the same time, he could vaguely maintain a deterrent effect, making them unavoidably afraid when they did something excessive. Killing two birds with one stone. The benefits were obvious. Josiah couldn't refute at this time. After a moment of silence, she asked quietly, "How are you going to deal with Betsy?" Being able to ask this question meant that Josiah acquiesced to Tang En's decision to retire. Tang En smiled when he heard this. Let's see how she will behave next. Every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. If she only targets me, then I will be a good person and let her kill me to end her thoughts. But if she has been blinded by hatred and involves you or others. After a pause, facing the warm spring sun and the gentle wind, a yellowed image suddenly flashed in front of Tang En's eyes. The talented guy died in his arms, murmuring in a dying voice, "If you have time, please help me take care of Betsy. And Bevan, don't kill her. Tang, promise me, don't kill Betsy." In a moment of absent-mindedness, Tang En felt his hand being held. Josiah said firmly, "I don't want to see you kill any more, especially today. Okay?" Tang En was startled when he heard this. He also knew that he had thought too simply. Today was his and Josiah's wedding day. No matter what, blood should not be spilled. He immediately nodded. "Of course, you're the boss today. Whatever you say goes. Only today." Okay, you'll be the boss in the future too. Go and change your clothes. We have to go out and welcome the guests later. He looked up at the sky. Strange, Alan said that he would arrive early today. Why hasn't he shown up yet? It's quite strange. He got engaged earlier than me, but I got married earlier than him. It's not just marriage. Have you forgotten? Someone even has children. Let's not talk about it. I should also go and change my clothes. Let's go, Humph. Chapter 11-18. Shanghai City East City District, the original living area of the noble class. Alan, who Tang En had spoken of as having yet to arrive, was now personally driving the carriage, passing through castles and manors with few people to a secluded area on the outskirts. Finally, the carriage slowly slowed down in front of a small manor. One had to say that apart from a few weird people, most of the nobles had good taste. Naturally, the environment they lived in was not bad. For example, the manor in front of him. Although it was located in a secluded area, the previous owner's rank was not high. However, just by looking at the rows of lush trees that surrounded the iron railing gate, the rather interesting and neat grassland, the exquisite attics that were scattered in twos and threes, and the silver ribbon river that surrounded the manor, one could tell that this place had definitely been meticulously taken care of, causing one to be unable to help but feel relaxed and happy. It was extremely suitable to live in for a long time. However, it was a pity that the East City Noble District, which was usually luxurious and exquisite, was now a dead place that no one could step into. It was cold and lonely, with flowers blooming everywhere, but no one to appreciate them. They could only feel sorry for themselves. This situation was not normal, but it was understandable. It was not that no one in the Grey Coat Army was tempted by this place, especially those high-ranking officers who thought of themselves as hard workers. The majestic castles and luxurious manors in front of them were very tempting to most of them who were born poor. However, no matter if it was the leader Josiah or the army commander Fry, they had no intention of moving here after entering the city. Since they did not move, no matter how much the high-ranking officers scratched their hearts, they did not dare to move. They could only look on helplessly. Therefore, in the end, the people who lived here were the few nobles who did not abandon their families and run away for various reasons. They were also the ones who did not get caught and tried for their crimes. Of course, there were always exceptions to everything. For example, the small manor that Alan pushed open the door and entered had a new owner who had a lot to do with the Grey Coat Army. Stepping on the grassland, passing through the pavilions and turning onto the small path in the back garden, Alan walked quickly until he reached the small river behind the manor. Only then did he slow down his pace. Looking around, the sound of flowing water could be heard. There were a few wooden houses of various sizes that were obviously newly built. They were not very elegant, but they were sturdy enough. They stood so grandly on the bank of the river that they clearly did not match the elegant atmosphere of this place. However, Alan, whose expression was slightly anxious and irritated, naturally didn't have the time to care about this at this moment. He paused for a moment and was about to walk towards the largest wooden house where there was some movement. At this moment, cough cough, cough cough. Amidst a series of light coughs, the door of the house was suddenly pushed open from the inside. Black and gray dust gas instantly gushed out, followed by a figure with a hand covering his face and messy hair rushing out quickly. He looked really embarrassed. Sister Lena. Alan? Why are you here?" Alan, who had just stepped forward, happened to come face to face with the figure who had rushed out. Both of them stopped at the same time and looked at each other in dismay. They could not help but be stunned. The latter was surprised to see Alan here, but Alan didn't expect to reunite with him in such a way. That's right, the person who had rushed out of the house was Lena. She was the former Nightingale of Lian City, later the alchemy master of the Yatong Chamber of Commerce, and now the important founding hero of the Grey Coat Army. In particular, the latter's identity and achievements had earned her the respect and love of almost everyone in the Grey Coat Army. It was not an exaggeration to say that other than the leader Josiah and the retired old Marshal Omeng, her position in the Grey Coat Army was almost equal to that of the Commander-in-Chief Fred. It was also because of this that when she had taken a fancy to the terrain surrounded by the river, which was suitable for alchemy experiments, Josiah had specially approved this manner for her without hesitation. The other high-ranking officers did not dare to have any complaints about this. "Sister Lena, are you all right?" Alan, who had regained his senses, quickly went forward and asked. I'm fine, cough cough. It's just a small operation error. It's normal. Lena waved her hand calmly, indicating that Alan should not get close to her, who was covered in dust. Then, she raised her hand and took off the mask covering her face. She shook it and looked at Alan, who was beside her with a face full of concern. She smiled gently and said with her pearly white teeth, Long time no see, Alan. I heard that you're engaged. Is it that Annika I saw last time? She's a good girl. Congratulations. Thank you. When Alan heard this, a hint of bitterness appeared at the corner of his mouth, but it disappeared in a flash. Then, his expression returned to its initial anxiety. He hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, Sister Lena, you've received the invitation too, right? Her arm paused. Lena turned to look at the indignant Alan. She slowly put away the mask in her hand, nodded, and replied casually, I've received it. You're here for this too, right? It just so happens that my experiment here is at a critical point. I can't leave, so I won't be going. Help me send my blessings to them. After saying this calmly, she turned to leave. Sister Lena. Alan suddenly clenched his fists and took a step forward. His expression suddenly became extremely agitated. Maybe there are some things that I shouldn't say, but you should fight for it. Lena's back paused. She raised her head and seemed to be exhaling softly. Then, she turned sideways and looked at Alan. She pointed at her dusty coat and smiled gently. Let me tidy up and make you a cup of tea. A moment later, under a bent old willow by the riverside, a short wooden table was used as a tea table. The two of them sat on the ground opposite each other. Steam rose in spirals, and the drooping willow branches swayed gently with the wind, as if welcoming them. The tea was very ordinary. When it entered the throat, it was first light and astringent, then slightly sweet. Unfortunately, the impatient Ellen couldn't wait for the slightly sweet taste to turn over. After a cup of tea, he anxiously advised again, Sister Lena, I know your feelings for Sir. Since you first met in Lion City, you've waited for him for a few years. Don't tell me you're so willing to give up. If not... She pinched the black porcelain teacup between her fingers as if she was pinching a thin petal. Lena's expression was emotionless, as if she was talking about something that happened to someone else. Her tone was extremely calm. You want me to fight for it, but how? Run to him and tell him that I like him? He doesn't even know. Or, just run to the wedding and make a scene for no reason and let people see a lunatic making a scene? Alan, Sister Lena, thank you for your kindness, really. She nodded and chuckled, then shook her head and sighed. But my identity is dirty, I don't deserve him, Alan, who suddenly received the news of Tang En and Josiah's marriage, rushed over. He only wanted to stand up for Lena, but neglected an important problem, which was that he didn't have a valid reason to do so. This wasn't a situation of a heartless scumbag or a mistress. Lena only had a one-sided crush from the beginning to the end. She didn't put it into action at all. She didn't even say anything about it. What position did she have to fight for it? However, after being stunned for a while, when Alan heard Lena's last sigh, his expression suddenly became agitated. With a bang, he slammed his fist heavily on the wooden table. Dirty? Who the hell dares to say that you're dirty? That's not right. Big Sister Lena, did someone say something strange and mention your past? Tell me who it is. Oh right, that Josiah is from Lion City, is it her? King. Looking at Alan's increasingly ferocious expression, Lena couldn't help but be stunned. She then frowned and shouted, Alan! Huff! After a few heavy breaths, Alan raised his hand and pulled his collar, slightly calming his intense emotions. I'm sorry, Sister Lena. You're the best woman in the world. I won't allow anyone to insult you. I understand. Leaning forward and gently stroking Alan's violently heaving shoulders, Lena said softly, "Thank you, Alan. Have some tea first." "No, you don't understand, Sister Lena, you'll never understand." His tone was both agitated and regretful. Alan's face flushed red, his hands fiercely twisting under the table. I am not. I like Sister Lena. I know you like Sister Lena. Not like, no, not that kind of like, sigh, ha ha." Looking at Alan, who was incoherent and hesitant like an ant on a hot pan, Lena couldn't help but shake her head and chuckle a few times. Then she pressed Alan's shoulders even harder. "Sister Lena, you really have to understand you like me, right?" This time, the word like was clearly emphasized, revealing a different meaning. Alan understood. His previously agitated expression instantly quieted down. He lowered his head and waist, like a child who was caught stealing candy, his body shrinking a little. So, Sister Lena, you know? Haha, my silly little brother, have you forgotten your sister's previous experience? Although it wasn't glorious, it also trained my ability to observe people's expressions. Was I that obvious? Subconsciously scratching his head, Alan lowered his head and smiled bitterly. "So Sister Lena, you already knew? Haha, no wonder you stayed in the Grey Coat Army and didn't want to return to the merchant group. I'm sorry, Sister Lena, I made it difficult for you." She shook her head calmly. "It's not that early. Although I sensed it at first, it wasn't easy to confirm. It wasn't until later, when you brought your lover, Annika, to me that I truly confirmed. Silly little brother, don't do this kind of thing in the future. Annika is a good person, she treats you very well. You can't let her down or else I won't let you go." "Okay, Sister Lena, I will definitely marry her." Alan bitterly nodded in response. Although he didn't say it out loud, both of them knew that this was a tactful way of clarifying their relationship. Lena nodded. "Okay, then let's do this. It's getting late, you should go back to attend the wedding." "But what about you, Sister Lena?" "I don't have to do anything. I'll drink tea alone, read ancient books, do some experiments, and occasionally tinker with a few alchemy gadget. It's pretty good, isn't it?" Lena said indifferently and even contentedly, but Alan felt like he was being pricked by needles. "If that's the case, Sister Lena, why don't you try? Try to forget Mr. Forget? Why? Wouldn't that make me feel better?" Lena spread out her hands. "I don't need to forget him, and I won't forget him. He thinks so too, because I'm so light to him, so insignificant, just like this cup of slightly astringent tea that cleans his stomach after a meal. He doesn't need to think about it all the time, as long as he occasionally takes a sip and changes the taste. To me, that's the greatest blessing." The end of his words, which carried an undisguised joy, and the gurgling sound of flowing water caused the atmosphere to become silent for a time. After a while, Alan got up and bowed, turned around, and strode away. Out of the gate of the manor, he drove the carriage back the way he came. He couldn't help but turn his head. Through the gap between the iron railings, he vaguely saw Lena's figure still sitting in the same place, under the bent old willow tree, drinking tea and drinking by herself. Then she turned her head and seemed to have seen him. She raised her hand and waved in his direction. She should be smiling when Alan raised his hand. The rows of trees on the side of the road were already in the middle, and then, he could no longer see her. Author's note. This chapter made Raccoon feel a little depressed. After checking and sending it out, he sat on the chair in a daze and thought about a lot of things. It was probably about the regrets of his first love. Bitterness wrapped around some insignificant happiness. He didn't know how to say it, and also didn't know what to say. Since it's like this, then let's reveal something. Raccoon confessed that in the original outline, Lena's character actually didn't have much writing, or more accurately, before the end of the first volume, she should have died. The reason was that a senior told Raccoon that the most taboo in writing was NTR. Even the slightest touch was not allowed, especially in the supporting roles that interacted with the protagonist. Therefore, according to the original plot, Lena should have died in the hands of Bevan. This way, Tangen would have sufficient reason to go crazy, kill her, and run away. This idea was very firm. But in the end, Raccoon still kept Lena alive, and only let her get hurt. The reason was very simple. Raccoon paid attention to the book review section at that time. As a newbie, he especially paid attention to the opinions of others. In the end, he saw a book friend who said in an extremely confident tone, but Raccoon forgot what it was specifically. Probably, the plot is too simple. One look and I know that Lena will definitely die. Raccoon didn't know why, but when he saw this, he was instantly enraged. His reverse psychology caused him to immediately change the plot and let Lena live just like that. It didn't matter if she lived, but the key was that he had to bury the hole he dug himself. Therefore, Raccoon then racked his brains to revise the outline, change the character settings, adjust the plot, and so on. Finally, he let the living Lena have room to play facepalm. It felt good in a fit of pique, but it was heartbreaking to revise. Alright, now that Raccoon thought about it, he felt that he was very childish at that time. Chapter 11:19. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind The Strongest Killer System and listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Pay attention to the Chinese website's official account, add friends on WeChat, add official account, type Kdred, and tell me secretly. Welcome, welcome, Uncle Darren, long time no see, please come in. Yes, long time no see. It's been a few years since you guys joined the Grey Coat Army. I see Leader Josiah often, but not you. Look at me, I was so caught up in my emotions that I didn't even have time to give you my blessings. Congratulations, Tangen. Haha, thank you. It's all thanks to you, Uncle Darren. If I didn't meet you guys back then, Josiah and I wouldn't have met so coincidentally. So, please let us give you a toast later. Haha, no problem, I'll take as many as you want. But, Brother Tangen, is it a little inappropriate for me to come here today? Those generals and higher-ups didn't receive an invitation, but I'm just a small regiment commander. It's okay, Uncle Darren, you're thinking too much. Today is just a simple gathering of Josiah's family and friends, nothing else. Oh, that's good, that's good. Then you go ahead, I'll go in myself. Okay, I'll go look for you later. Yo, old Marshal Omeng, why are you here personally? Can't you just get someone to give you your blessings? Haha, you're not being sincere, kid. I remember our agreement back then. As long as I'm still alive, I'll definitely come to attend your and Josiah's wedding. Alright, it's all my fault. But since you've said so, don't blame me for making you lie down when you go back later. Bullsh *T. Come and try if you're so capable. Haha. In the evening, in the main hall of the original City Lord's mansion, the current wedding venue. Needless to say, with Joshua's current status and rank, whether it was the people in the Grey Coat Army, or the unrelated nobles, rich merchants, celebrities, and so on, there were countless gazes, either fervent or resentful, that were looking at this side and fantasizing that they could step over the threshold of the City Lord's mansion, which was not high. But unfortunately, under Josiah's unromantic arrangements, small regiment commanders like Uncle Darren, or the guards and servants in the City Lord's mansion could give her their blessings, but they could only watch from the outside. How pitiful! Of course, as the person involved, Tangen would not care about these sorrowful grievances. On the contrary, he was very happy, because standing at the door and acting as a greeter, he used less than an hour to smoothly complete the reception work and take back all the invitations that were sent out. How comfortable! If a wedding could be so simple, then getting married didn't seem too bad. With that thought in mind, Tangen cheerfully asked the guards on both sides to close the door, and told them to go in and have a drink or something after changing shifts. Boss, congratulations! As soon as he stepped into the front yard, Harry leaned over like a ghost, with an undisguised fawning smile on his face. Harry snorted. "Cut it out, I haven't settled the score with you this morning. If I wasn't happy today, I would have let you have a taste of my power now." Tang En glanced sideways at Harry, who wanted to say something but stopped. He waved his hand in annoyance. "All right, speak if you have something to say." "Haha, thank you, boss." Harry laughed dryly and rubbed his palms awkwardly. Then, he quickly said in a low voice, "That chick came in from the back door. She's already done it." Needless to say, that chick was naturally Betsy. "We thought she would poison the food, but she's quite smart." "Well, boss, there's something wrong with the napkin on your table." She sprinkled a light amount of hallucinogenic powder on it. "Just hallucinogenic powder?" Tang En raised his eyebrows in surprise and nodded with some appreciation. "She's quite smart. The so-called hallucinogenic powder was an item that could cause slight reactions such as sleepiness and hallucinations. It belonged to the category of pharmaceutic. It was very common and harmless. Some people in the other world even used it as a cheap sleeping pill." "Yes, she's smart." Harry nodded in agreement. "If she used poison at the beginning, even if it's a colorless and tasteless top-notch product, it's hard to guarantee that it'll be foolproof. It's even less likely to escape your sharp senses, boss. And as long as it's a poison, it's something that can't kill people immediately. It's also impossible to kill once it's exposed to blood. It's very easy to make mistakes like this. But hallucinogenic powder is different. This thing's harm can't even be compared to knockout drugs, not to mention that it's light, so it's very likely that it'll slip through. Other than that, what's even better is that once the wine and the hallucinogenic powder are mixed together, it'll be the best effect enhancer, and it won't arouse suspicion. Others, and even the victim themselves, will just think that they've drunk too much wine, so they'll feel dizzy and sleepy." Harry's explanation was very detailed, and his appreciation for seeing a fellow who wasn't a moron was obvious. However, Tang En shook his head after hearing it and pursed his lip. "Not only that, that silly girl insisted on making me fall asleep first. It seems that she really wants to stab me a dozen times to vent her anger." "Why don't, boss, you just let her stab you a dozen times?" Harry spread his hands and sighed. "When she came in, I pretended to be a guard and bumped into her. Boss, do you know what I found on her body? It can't be big breasts. It's really ominous. The sleeve arrow on her left wrist, the dagger in her boot, and several powerful explosive crystals wrapped around her belt. She's a moving arsenal. Damn, it scared me so much that I broke out in a cold sweat." Tang En was also stunned when he heard that. After a moment, he shook his head speechlessly. "Didn't I just kill her death-seeking brother? What kind of grudge does she have to go to this extent? Pass down the order to act according to that silly girl's first plan. Don't let her go crazy. Then, let her stab me. Boss is wise. Get lost. That's why it's said that people have no choice in the world. If you can use your hands, it's best not to use your mouth. If you can cut the weeds and eliminate the roots, try to kill the whole family as much as possible. Otherwise, won't trouble come?" Shaking his head, "Forget it. On a happy day, harmony is the most important thing. Harmony is the most important thing." Tang En quickly adjusted his expression, especially when he saw a middle-aged beautiful woman with an air of nobility coming in front of him. She was faintly out of tune with the current atmosphere of the crowd. He put on a harmless smile and took the initiative to greet her. "Good evening, Auntie. Are you looking for Josiah? She's tidying up her clothes in the back hall. Do you want me to take you there?" "There's no need. Shia's father can accompany her." After a pause, the middle-aged beautiful woman looked at the humble and polite Tang En in front of her, who had an ordinary face and was somewhat of an eyesore. Her gaze was a little complicated. She wanted to say something, but in the end she just nodded and said, "The wedding is about to begin. Tang En, sir, Little Tang, auntie, you can just call me Little Tang. Well, we'll be a family in the future. You don't have to be too polite. His appearance is average, but at least he looks honest and polite. The middle-aged beautiful woman, oh, Josiah's mother, secretly muttered in her heart with a smile on her face. However, if she knew that her honest son-in-law was regretting that he didn't kill his whole family just now, it was hard to say how she would feel. It's almost time. Little Tang, go and get ready. He nodded obediently. Okay, I'll go now. The wedding began. There was no lingering and moving movement, no flickering candlelight on the high platform. There was no kind-looking presiding priest, nor were there any young boys and girls holding baskets of flowers and throwing petals. This was more like a simple wedding where guests were invited to a meal. The only proper process was the climax of the wedding. The curtain opened. Josiah wrapped her arms around her father's arm. A charming middle-aged man with a small mustache slowly walked from behind. The most beautiful moment in a woman's life was the moment she put on the wedding dress. Tang En didn't care much about this saying before because he didn't have a woman who was willing to put on a wedding dress for him. But now it was different. Looking at Josiah, who was wearing a holy wedding dress and walking leisurely, Tang En was stunned and instantly became the most loyal fan of this saying. This pure and beautiful woman was like the girl next door. She was dignified and proud. She was the woman of the legendary queen. Was she going to be Tang En's wife from now on? Oh, thank God for his blessing! Perhaps because the happiness was too strong, Tang En sincerely expressed his most sincere gratitude to God, who was now covered in dirt by him for the first time. Then he looked at Josiah, who saw his blank expression and unconsciously smiled faintly. He remembered some of the past events. "Classmate, are you looking for a book? Tell me the name of the book, I might know it. I'm a student, but don't look down on me. I'm still a beginner mage. Reading 10,000 books is not as good as traveling 10,000 miles? That's true, I learned it again. Tang, your thoughts are very deep and interesting. Can I come and chat with you often in the future? Have you heard of the Grey Coat Army? It's not a rebellion, it's a reform. Reform is very difficult. It takes a long time to succeed. It might take 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, or even longer. It also needs many like-minded people to work together. Tang, are you willing to help me? The City of Dawn is gone. Aunt Rosa is gone, and many people died. I don't know what happened. Everything was fine before, everyone was fine. How did it become like this all of a sudden? Tang, I'm so tired, really tired. Why did you come back so late? I don't want to bring up old scores, really. When I was in Lion City, I didn't like to attend banquets because I didn't like to listen to those noblewomen talk about old scores and scold those who were ungrateful. Wasn't this their choice in the past? Since they had already made a choice, of course they had to bear the consequences, right? Haha, I just didn't expect. One day I would become the kind of person I hated the most. But what else do you want me to do? Tell me, what should I do? Tang. Let's get married. There was a thunderous applause. In his memory, there were countless impressions of youthful, kind, stubborn, dignified, and so on. Finally, they overlapped with the real and happy face in front of him, which was getting closer and closer. The corners of Tang En's mouth curled up slightly as he thought to himself. Sure. His slender hand stretched out, just like that sunny afternoon in the small southern town a few years ago, beside the quiet bookshelf. Hello, classmate. Can we get to know each other? My name is Josiah. To be honest, no matter how one looked at it, this wedding was somewhat lacking in class. But it didn't matter. As long as the scene was warm enough and Tang En and Josiah were happy, who could say that this wedding was not a success? Of course, except for one person. Humph, I'll let you be happy for now. You'll cry later. Behind the crowd, outside the hall, Betsy, who was wearing a wide-winged hat, looked at Tang En, who took Josiah from his future father, with a hateful and dazzling happy smile on her face. She straightened her collar and curled her lips, looking very disdainful. Betsy's perception naturally couldn't stop the wedding from proceeding in an orderly manner, at least not now. And to be honest, there was really no need to stop it, because the whole process was proceeding very quickly, under the gaze of less than 100 people around them. Tang En and Josiah smiled at each other, nodded and saluted. Then, holding hands, they turned to face the crowd and saluted shoulder to shoulder. The thunderous applause sounded again, mixed with a few whistles, and the wedding was over. Then, the crowd was divided. Tang En and Josiah brought 2 tables of relatives and friends to the side hall, which was separated by a wall. The rest of the city lord mansion's guards, odd job workers, and other people who came to support them stayed in the hall. There was also a table here to entertain them. Both parties sat down and encouraged each other to drink and eat. It was lively and noisy. Well, as mentioned earlier, instead of saying that this was a wedding, it was better to say that this was a daily treat. The simplicity was really outrageous. Betsy was very patient. After waiting for more than an hour, the hall was filled with drunkenness. She saw Tang En wiping the corner of his mouth with a napkin twice, and her former best friend, Josiah, helped him wipe it once. After drinking at least 2 cans of wine, she nodded in satisfaction and quietly walked into the hall. She asked for a glass of orange juice from a passing waiter, then found a guard who was holding a glass of wine and looking for people to drink with. She patted the guard's shoulder. "You are? Oh, I've seen you before. Young Master Obi's friend, the beautiful Miss Robert, right?" Betsy was her first name, and Robert was her last name. From this, it could be seen that Betsy was indeed very cautious. The red-faced guard who was trying to identify Betsy's identity was obviously very drunk. He smiled foolishly with the smell of alcohol. "Haha, so Miss Robert is also here today. Well, let's toast to our beloved leader." "She's your leader, not my leader. Why should I drink with you?" After secretly criticizing, Betsy subconsciously covered her nose and stepped back. She raised the glass of juice in her hand apologetically. "Sorry, I'm allergic to wine." Is juice okay? I'll toast to Big Brother with juice." The guard naturally wouldn't refuse. After all, it wasn't common for a pretty girl to take the initiative to have a drink with him. This could be seen from the envious gazes of his companions at the table beside him. He immediately nodded and drank the wine in his glass in a heroic manner. Betsy didn't drink slowly either. After putting down the empty glass in her hand, she nodded politely again and smiled. "By the way, can I ask Big Brother for a favor? Help me go to the side hall and call Obi. Tell him that I'm waiting for him there." She pointed to the corner of the hall where the wine and desserts were placed. "Of course, no problem." After the guard staggered into the side hall, a slightly thin young man walked out from inside. He looked around and quickly found Betsy waiting in the corner of the hall. "Sister Betsy, why are you so late? The wedding is over." "Oh, I'm sorry, Obi. Something came up and I was delayed." Betsy helplessly spread her hands as if she was regretful. "Then what do we do now?" The thin young man, who was Josiah's cousin, Obi, scratched his head and suggested, "Why don't you go in with me now and give your blessing in person? Anyway, my sister doesn't know that you're here. This is also a surprise, isn't it? Don't joke around. If I really go in with you, there will only be a surprise, not a surprise." Betsy shook her head without thinking. She replied with a bitter smile, "No, Obi. My identity is different from yours now. The less I show my face, the better. Otherwise, if someone with ulterior motives sees it, my people in Bulin will be in danger. Do you understand?" Of course, Obi understood. It was not difficult to understand. With the current relationship between the Grey Coat Army and the Bran, it was not too much to see them as enemies. Even they were secretly sent here from the south by their brother-in-law, Tang En. Then what should we do? Tang En's foolish brother-in-law was at his wits' end. Sister Becky, you've come all the way from the south. Can't you even say a word of blessing and go back? That's not necessary. Betsy's eyes flashed. I have an idea, but I'll have to trouble you. And, when you find a suitable opportunity, you can call Josiah to the small garden behind the hall. I'll wait for him there and give my blessing in person. This will be the best of both worlds. Okay. But what is a suitable opportunity? It's when no one notices Josiah. How about this? I see that brother-in-law of yours. Oh right, what's his name again? Tang-en? And I see that Tang-en is almost done drinking. Let's wait for him to get drunk. This way, everyone will pay attention to him and won't notice your sister Josiah. He clapped his hands. Good idea. I'll go and wait now. Obi. He turned around in surprise. And? Sister Betsy, do you need me to do anything else? No, it's just that. It's just that. Well, this time it's all thanks to you helping Sister Becky. Thank you so much. She nodded sincerely. It's nothing. And I also want to see my sister happier today. And I promise your sister will be happy. That's good. I'll go first, so gullible. Looking at Obi, who ran excitedly to the side hall, Betsy could not help but shake her head slightly. Then, she sighed softly and silently apologized in her heart. I'm sorry. Just as you think about your sister, I also have to avenge my brother who died many years ago. Taking a deep breath, Betsy touched the cold sleeve arrow hidden under her left sleeve. She quickly adjusted her mood and walked to the small door at the side of the hall. Everything was going well. Now, she just had to wait for that damn bastard to fall asleep and walk right into the trap. But at this moment, suddenly. Sister Betsy? What a good event for a free lunch. Cool phones waiting for you. Click on the Chinese website's official account, WeChat friend, add official account, type KTRED, and participate immediately. There's a prize for everyone. Follow KTRED's official account on WeChat right now. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.